And we're back.
Welcome to No Direction, the Pathfinder News, Reviews, and Interviews podcast. I'm Ryan Costello.
And I'm Jefferson J. Thacker, also known as Perram.
We have, we'll call it a monumental book to review today. It is a book that's interesting beyond just its theme and topic. That topic is the planes.
Okay.
The book is Planar Adventures, but the reason that I'm saying it's monumental is that it is the last first edition hardcover book. And so most of us, I believe, have a complete set of Pathfinder books up until now. All right, you know what? I shouldn't assume that most people do. But I do, except for a book that shall not be named.
Right.
And I was debating about getting this book. But now that it's got historic significance, I am debating it even more. Or at least I was until Paizo, we got in touch with them, and we were given a review copy of the book, a PDF at least, before the book was available in stores. So full disclosure, this is a review copy we were given. We will not let it bias our opinions, but it is important that you do know that that is what is happening here. Perram, I've gone on the record as saying I just don't care for the planes, and that when this book was announced, I was not super interested.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about the planes periodically through the show, incidentally, and you seem to be not interested.
Ambivalent is my feeling towards the planes. I don't care about them, and I don't understand what the appeal is.
Okay.
And I should say that that was my opinion going into this book, and assume that everything I'm saying is from the point of view of a Ryan that has not read this book.
Okay.
We will get to my feelings about this book specifically. But yeah, so there's a couple of things that I don't get about the planes. One is that most of them just seem completely inaccessible, like all of the elemental ones. It's specifically, all right, well, now I'm quoting the book, but the quote, I was always curious about the plane of Earth because it's the one we talk about the least. But yeah, it's basically infinite dirt. I wasn't sure if it was actually land that you could walk on, but it's like, nope, it's like the plane of water, but dirt.
Right.
And I think I would be more interested because like there's maps of them. It shows like, this is how they're connected. This is all interesting, but it doesn't seem like that connection matters. The planes have always felt almost like just separate planets. So it's not like one day you'll wake up and the sky is on fire and you're like, oh, the plane of fire is winning some kind of war among the elemental planes. And so we have to go to the elemental plane and put them back in place, balance things out because the material plane is affected by what's going on outside of it. It doesn't feel like that. It doesn't. And there's also like, I don't know how to handle the planes in a way that's interesting because it really gets to the idea of like free will versus predetermination, where outsiders don't seem to have free will. And that's a lot less interesting than a planet full of people with free will. The material plane is way more interesting than any other plane to me. And so like First World, I like conceptually, but I don't know how to use it that well. Like I couldn't run a whole campaign. I could run an adventure in the First World and make it interesting. But eventually any plane other than the material plane, I feel runs out of steam and like gets less logical the closer you look at it. So what am I missing? What is it that's so cool about the planes?
All right, so the appeal of the planes is mostly, I think, in how I think a lot of the appeal from the planes originates from how they were often used in games, where the planes themselves are these really alien environments, these really exotic, over-the-top places where the basic rules of reality are different. If you go to another planet, yeah, it might have heavier gravity, yeah, the air might be made out of helium, and yeah, it might have 18-legged jellyfish as its only sentient race, but it still follows the rules of reality that we know. And the planes don't have to follow that. You can have David Bowie walking upside down on the ceiling of stairs in a plane, and that is fine. They have their own rules of reality. That it's important that when you are changing the rules of reality, that anything that you change it to operate under its own rules. Just because those are different doesn't mean they don't need to exist, or else you're just in silly time. which is okay, I guess, if you're in a chaos plane, but not so much if you're...
If the rules are there are no rules, that's still
Right.
a rule.
Right, exactly. And also, the planes have historically been what happens when you need to challenge adventures that can handle anything on the mortal conception. The planes are where you go to find foes both weird and devious enough and powerful enough. And also, because the planes are the domains of the gods, whenever it's time to throw down with the evil god that you've been campaigning against for 20 levels, that's when the plane content is important, because you're going to have to go to their home turf.
Yeah, and honestly, like, if you look at the comics I've pulled in my lifetime, I've pulled books like Squirrel Girl and X-Men, stuff that it's about social stuff or street level things. I've never pulled Silver Surfer. I've never pulled Guardians of the Galaxy. So the things you're describing, it's like, all right, I can see how that's interesting. It's just not interesting to me.
And I think that's key. This is definitely cosmic level, high concept, high reality adventuring. Some people in the chat are mentioning Planescape, the Dungeons and Dragons setting that a lot of people have a lot of fondness for, because that was how they handled the mixing and travel with a lot of their planar content. And because the planes have different rules, that doesn't mean they're divorced from different politics. And when you're dealing with politics at a divine level, at a fundamental force of creation level, you can have really interesting stories made up where the stakes are extremely high.
Oilant Green in chat says street level things in the planes are the best bits. And it's all right. I can see that working. But it goes back to my earlier point. It's like, I'm worried that the closer you look at it, especially when you look at it on the street level, if the psychology of the inhabitants doesn't matter, then it feels like there's less you can actually do at that level. Like, if you can't do anything other than really cool fights or like giant political sweeping things, then it's like, I'm missing out on the thing I enjoy the most as a GM and as a player.
Yeah, and I think a lot of this is your assumption that the outsiders don't have free will. Whereas in Pathfinder specifically, and we're going to go into that when we start reading about this book, that's not true. The outsiders have an extreme amount of free will, and that free will and that much power combined together are what produces the planar adventures that we've seen in Pathfinder so far. Famously, the Pathfinder Society had an entire season dedicated to the elemental planes.
Yeah, I did not enjoy that season. Actually, I didn't play that season. I only played the special for that season. And I remember the GM just getting bogged down with minor rules that were constantly shifting. And I think in a different setting, a GM could have made a lot of fun out of that. But because it was a special and because you only get it a certain amount of time ahead to prepare, it was a chore for him. So I will comment on my assumption, and it's true. It is my assumption that outsiders don't have free will, and I've always seen outsiders played one of three ways: either Shakespearean, which kind of works, so like rigid that they're kind of morons, and that's them at their worst, I think. And then there's so similar to humans and just to like an evolved society that it's like, why are we doing this on the plains then? Let's just do this in the familiar streets, and let's do this with the politics that directly affect these characters instead of these cosmic things that sort of affect them, but also, like I was saying, things that happen on the plains barely seem to actually matter to the material plane. So that being my impression of the plains as a topic and as a setting, let's go into Planar Adventures and see if it has any options that can appeal to me.
Yeah, but I want to say
everybody.
I want to say, since we're on the topic, and I mentioned earlier, I think it's ironic that this is Pathfinder's last book, because the planes are usually your character's last adventures in traditionally. So this is like, oh, of course, the plane book is the one we're going to end this on, because that's how you would end your traditional sweeping epic campaign.
I like that. That's poetic. It's apropos.
All right. So we got Planar Adventures.
Yes. So we were told shortly after it was announced. Shortly after second edition was announced, that this was going to be rules light. And so that was another me just taking my ring out of my hat out of the ring for this book, because it's like, then it's just going to be on the topic I don't care about. And looking at the page count, we've got the first chapter is planar characters, and it is only 46 pages, and that covers archetypes, feats, spells, magic items. It's only a dozen archetypes. Then we've got running planar adventures, which is traditionally in these adventures books. Those are my favorite chapters.
Right.
And this is the one that I had the most questions for, and so I was looking forward to the most. Then we have
the majority of this
almost
book.
120 pages of campaign setting material about the different planes.
Right.
And as you know, I don't like campaign setting material in my hardcover role-playing game book. So, like, this being a third of the book, that was the biggest uphill battle for this book for me to for it to appeal to me. And then finally, we get 30 pages of bestiary content.
Right. Yeah. So only 4 chapters, and you're right. Traditionally, this would have been, if this was under the old strictures of their publishing material, this would have been a campaign setting hardcover.
Yes.
Yeah. And you're right. There's about 70 pages of rules in this book total. All of it is either chapter 1 or 4, with a little bit of an exception scattered throughout chapter 3, but only in the ways that the planar stat blocks then tie back into chapter 1's player abilities. There are a selection of spells and feats that tie into this concept of pulling in some of the planers, basically channeling some of the plane effects. And so each of the planes, when we get into that section, will have the different effects that can be channeled by those abilities. But that seems to be the extent of rules content beyond chapter 1.
Yeah, beyond the player options. Someone in chat has mentioned that they didn't see this book on the game store shelves. This is an advanced copy that we received that we are reviewing. It will not be available on shelves until July 10th, although I'm told it's been shipped out to subscribers, and when subscribers get the shipping notification, I believe that's when they get the PDF in their box.
Yeah.
Their inbox. So,
and that's a rolling release date, not... It looks like only the earliest of subscribers have gotten it. It looks like they started getting it yesterday.
Oh, just yesterday?
Yeah. All right.
So, you know what, Perram? We've talked about the 4 chapters. I do want to call out the introduction.
Okay.
Normally, the introduction of the hardcover books is the most skippable section. It's 2 pages of, I don't know, just feels like it drags on most of the time. The first paragraph is really all you need, and then everything else just kind of summarizes stuff that we already know.
Okay.
I think that this was actually an extremely handy introduction. Probably my favorite introduction of any hardcover book.
Honestly, there was a version of this review where I wanted to open it just by reading that opening chapter.
And it's like, it starts with what is a plane, visualizing the great beyond, and then it just goes into these are the major planes and a little bit more than the elevator pitch about them. So it just kind of gets your head into a place of like, this is what's normal, this is what's weird, but normal to them.
Right.
And like, these are all terms that I'm familiar with, being like fairly engrossed in the Pathfinder campaign setting, but because this is never something I'm focused on, it's nice to be like, to have my hand held and just to be walked through all these things that are going to make up so much of the material in this book.
Yeah, and it's weird to where they talk about like the structures and positioning of the different planes and how they're connected, but then they also mention, but they're infinitely big. So like my brain just sort of breaks when I'm actually trying to visualize it, and then so I look at the maps and I'm like, how is this possible? How do you put infinity in a circle?
Well, it mentions later on that some planes are Pac-Man style. You leave the map on one side, you'll show up on the other side, and some of them just don't end. So deal with it. So and it even theorizes that there's stuff beyond the planes.
Yeah. That's of course beyond that's the little section called Beyond the Beyond, and oh my goodness, especially when they start talking about what were the first planes that were probably ever created, and it's like, oh, the outer shell and the abyss were probably first. So the absolute worst place to be in all of creation was first.
Well, yeah, and then it just got better. So chapter 1 starts off with archetypes. Yeah. It's about a dozen archetypes, and each archetype is strictly formatted to a single page with a piece of art. Not something we're used to. Usually archetypes just kind of flow one to the other. Usually its section is headed by the class, and then here's a certain number of archetypes that fall under that. They've broken from that format before, I believe, with Ultimate Wilderness? No, Ultimate Wilderness did by class. Anyway, some of the adventure books did like, here's just all of the archetypes and we'll just put them in alphabetical order, and in brackets we'll tell you what the class is. Yeah. So this one is alphabetical order by archetype, and there's no particular system. There's no logic to which classes got archetypes. It was basically just, I guess, whichever class fit concepts the best. So we've got a swashbuckler archetype, a bard, a rogue, an alchemist, a fighter, a cleric, a witch, a ranger, an investigator, a druid, a spiritualist, and a wizard.
Now, a lot of these were required. The clerics needed an archetype, the druids needed an archetype, and the wizards had to have an archetype for this book to work, because these are the people that need to be. These are the people that are going to taxi your party through the planes. So if anybody was going to get rules content, it was important that those three got it.
And I was worried that not just the content of this chapter, but the content of this book, the rules would just be, here's the planar rules that exist, now here's lower level versions of it. Here's just making the planes more accessible to everybody.
Right. Now, I want to call out, of these archetypes, there are some really strong archetypes here, both in physical power they have. It almost seems a kick up in power scale here. I'm looking specifically at the Azadiel and the Gloomblade. And there's also a lot of very well done thematic components here. And specifically, I'm looking at the Soul Warden as, and again, the Azadiel, of just like, and the Gloomblade, I'm going to call that one back out again too, as concepts that I thought we were running out of cool concepts, and on their last hurrah they managed to deliver some characters that I would actually really want to play. This is Azadiel, swashbuckler, and specifically they are see, the Azadiels are champions of the Elysium plane, so chaotic good plane, and they are basically little jesters on the battlefield. I say little because they're using a gnome for the iconic for this archetype. Speaking of which, I'm going to go ahead and pull it up on screen so people can see what we're talking about real quick. I really like this one because it specifies in intentionally doing things that would provoke attacks of opportunity. This thing is going to be weaving through the battlefield on purpose, trying to get hit, avoiding those hits with its abilities, and then causing the opponents to hit each other when they're just trying to hit the character. And that alone, the possibility to play that and mixing that in with a lot of the swashbuckler's panache abilities, it has a lot of my mischievous side is really pleased that this exists.
So Perram, I've got a note on my page. I don't know if you can read it. It says, I want to play this. Sorry, I would play this. In fact, I want to, because this is such a fun-looking version of the swashbuckler. It gets Battle Dance, which basically increases its speed by 10 feet every 4 levels. And I love a fast melee character. I like a lightly armored melee character, which I know baffles some people, but that's like, if I had one type of character that I play constantly, it's lightly armored melee characters. And having a fast melee character that messes with people, it has high charisma, this looks like a blast. And it takes the swashbuckler, which I already think is a pretty fun looking class, although I think it's a little rigid in how it's the core one is designed, and it just makes it super flexible.
I know. And this is one, like, the swashbuckler has a problem where a lot of its archetypes aren't particularly attractive, especially compared to core swashbuckler. And it's really nice that the swashbuckler particularly got one of the best archetypes I've seen in Pathfinder. The other one I want to call...
You mentioned the Gloomblade. There's a couple of other archetypes. I'm just going to give my quick notes on them before we move on to the Gloomblade. The Energist is an alchemist who turns positive and negative energy into a science. So this is the most dedicated but interesting healer version of an alchemist I've ever seen. Let's see what my notes are. Surprisingly finicky rules, but a great archetype mechanically and flavorfully.
Yeah, sorry, go on talk about it for a little bit while I
Sure.
wait for the dogs to die down.
Well, actually, I'll go over my notes from some of the other classes too. There's the Chronicler of Worlds Bard archetype, which uses intelligence instead of charisma, which I don't know if I've ever seen that. If there are other Bard archetypes that do that, it's rare. And unfortunately, after that, it kind of loses me because this one is very much if you are a planar adventurer, if you are going to other planes, this is a good bard for you. If you are just someone looking for a little planar influence on a character, no, this character does not work on the material plane. If this character is not shifting planes, this archetype rather, then you've lost.
Well,
you're not using most of your abilities.
This will also be good for bards that know they're going to be fighting a lot of planar opponents. So if you're going into like a devil or demon heavy campaign, a lot of their abilities will help you out.
Yes. This is still one of the only archetypes in this book that I don't like. And the ones that I do like, Perram, I like a lot.
Yeah, I knew that the rules content was going to be light in this book. I didn't know it would also be this much fun. Can I talk about the Goonblade now? Can I talk about the Goonblade?
The Dream Thief, just quickly.
Okay.
Dream Thief is a rogue archetype that gives up. Let's see. It alters its class skills, and it gives up Sneak Attack, Master Strike, Trap Sense, Uncanny Dodge. If it's a rogue class feature, like if you think of rogues and you think of their core class features, this class gives them up, and I have no idea how this class would play. It looks interesting. It's got cool flavor. It's just like it's hard for me to visualize this character, this archetype being made into a character that works on the battlefield.
It is high concept for sure. I do not know what this would look like mathematically, but I do know that it would make a very, if all I was worried about role playing, the ability to jump in and out of people's dreams is fascinating.
Perram, the Gloom Blade.
The Gloom Blade!
Can I show you my handwritten notes on this one too? I don't know how well it comes off, but it's just hearts, more hearts. This is my new favorite fighter archetype.
All right, let me go ahead and toss it up on screen. This is a good point to know that this episode is being recorded with the threat of connection problems. In the case that this episode goes down, we will be right back in just a few minutes. So just be patient, and the episode will come back. Okay, I'm going to pull that up. Okay, the Gloomblade, a fighter archetype. Okay, so fighter archetypes have not traditionally been some of the most awesome things ever, but in this case it is. The basic gist of the Gloomblade is they have some connection to the shadow plane, and this lets them summon their quote-unquote shadow weapon. And their shadow weapon can be any weapon they want it to be. And
that they're proficient with.
But it's a fighter. Okay, so unless it's exotic, you're proficient with it. And if it's exotic, become proficient with it, then summon it. It automatically gets magical enhancements all the way up. You're able to summon 2 of these at once if you want to go the 2-weapon fighting route at higher levels. You can spontaneously throw on different enchantments on the blades as you get in higher levels. You get weapon training for this thing, weapon specialization, all that jazz is all on this weapon. It's basically the fighter that gets to play like a video game RPG's fighter and just pull out whatever it wants from thin air and beat people with it.
So this is when I realized the potential of this book, because the planes basically cover everything, but the planes aren't magic. And so you can have a fighter class that is just loaded with supernatural abilities, and he's not casting. Like, there's a clear reason this is a fighter archetype and not a Magus archetype, because if this was a Magus archetype, it would that would be redundant ability. But as a fighter, it's something we've never seen before. It's similar to the Shadow Slayer from the Blood of the Fae, whatever the Fae book that recently came out was. And I like that Slayer archetype enough that's the Slayer I'm playing in one of my Pathfinder Society home games. So like this like it doesn't even give up the bonus feats. Like that's one of the frustrating things about fighter archetypes is usually they're getting an ability instead of a feat, and the ability is usually of comparable level to a feat, of comparable power. So it's like until you start stringing some of those abilities together to make something interesting, you're just losing some versatility in the favor of a theme. But this is like you're modifying the non-feat options. So you're replacing armor training, you're losing heavy armor and shield proficiency. And you're swapping out some really interesting, or so you're gaining some really interesting skills. You're gaining acrobatics, knowledge planes, perception, which should have been on the fighter's skill list all along, and stealth, giving up climb, handle animal, ride, and swim. Climb and swim are just feat, skill point taxes for a class that barely has enough skill points. And handle animal and ride, I do not care about as a guy who loves fighters. Like, the skill list alone was like, ooh, this fighter has my attention. And then all of these cool abilities, it's just, I need to be playing this fighter very quickly. And the fact that it has knowledge planes will play into when we get to the feat section, because that is a very important skill to be good at for the conduits type of feats that we're going to be reviewing.
All right.
It's got good flavor. It's got good mechanics. It's elegant. I was worried when I saw that it was like 1 page per archetype that we were going to get some like either pagination was going to force some abilities to be kind of complicated or restricted, or it was going to feel like just they had to feel like basically when you have to do it to a specific word count, it gets a little iffier about how you're going to use those words. But none of these archetypes seem to suffer from this strict format.
No, I will. There's one I thought did suffer. I think that the inner, just as cool as it was, I think that because of its abilities were so complicated, that it really suffered from not having another page to spread itself out on.
Okay. Next up is the Idealist. My notes is this is bad, right?
It's not bad it's okay. It's a cool concept. Basically, the Idealist is a cleric that is so attached to their deity that they can call in little pocket dimensions of their plane, basically a radius around them that they would channel energy, becomes their god's planes. And so the rules of their god's planes now apply to that little area that they're in. So if that's a place where gravity doesn't seem to apply to you in that little 30-foot area, gravity no longer applies, and things like that.
Yeah, so that's the Invoke Realm ability, which you give up channel energy for.
Right.
And having just a pocket of a plane that may have some strange effects on the material planes doesn't feel like most of your gods will not make a very interesting character. And then Planar Bond is a minor, like you get a couple of spells added to your spell list, and you're giving up spontaneous casting of cure spells.
Yeah, that's the part that, this is not a healy cleric. So if you're not making a cleric healer, you're not giving up a lot. But if you are, but killing is such a huge part of the cleric, so you're making some very valuable trades.
I don't know. I don't see it. But that's, I think, the last one that I did not like. At this point, should we just go archetype to archetype?
I mean, we can, but I really want to call. I think I don't want to just go point by point through the whole book, but I do want to call out 2 that I really, really liked.
So I don't want to go through the whole book, but I find the archetypes are so strong.
Okay.
That we've done half of them at this point anyway.
Right. Pact Witch.
All right. Yeah. Pact Witch. Rules light. Excellent execution of the concept that you are having a pact with. What is your patron here?
Well, it depends on which planner. Yeah. So you
have a pact with the plane based on your alignment instead of having a pact to what was already an abstract concept. So this is like a very small shift in how the witch works, but I do really like getting the psycho comps familiar.
Yeah. Well, you will doubly like another archetype later.
All right. Planar Scout. This one surprised me.
Mm-hmm.
This is the one that I was really expecting to be. It's the Ranger, but for planes instead of favorite terrain.
Right.
No, instead it gets like a dozen ability scores, and Planar Bond is an ability score that has options within it based on which plane you are attached to. So like you can be engulfed in fire, you can fly, you can get fast healing. Like these are powerful abilities. You're giving up Hunter's Bond, which frankly is not great. Like of all the characters that get a pet, the Ranger's pet is traditionally the worst.
Right. You're usually
it's the worst without being a familiar who is not supposed to have a combat role.
Right. Well, honestly, in some ways the familiar is better because the utility roles of the familiar are at least super useful. Whereas an under-leveled animal companion is just something you're going to resurrect frequently. I mean, usually there's a feat tax associated with being a ranger to take those feats that you take in order to level its pet up to your level.
Yeah, so the first chunk of these class features are the Ranger of the Plains, but man, Planar Bond is fun. Like, I can see a dozen interesting characters just going, like, maximizing these planar things. And it also brought to my attention that a lot of these archetypes say, like, oh, you're getting your influence from this plane, but none of them restrict you to just the one plane. So if I'm playing a Gloom Blade who is associated with the Shadow Plane,
right,
and then I want to be a Planar Scout, like I want to multi-class into Planar Scout of the Plane of Fire, I can just engulf my shadowy self into fire.
Why not? Smoke and Flame, that's pure Tolkien there.
I wasn't thinking Tolkien. I was thinking it just sounds really cool. I'm just surprised that there's no restriction like bonded plane. If you get another class from bonded plane, you have to use the same bonded plane. There's nothing like that. There's no restriction. So you can just be someone who is an adventurer of two worlds on the material plane, bringing these two separate planes to like on your adventures with you.
We got a correction from chat.
Oh,
I didn't want to call this out when I noticed it. I wasn't sure, but Dalian and Vaneth Dreadstar point out that with the Idealist, you are not giving up Cure Light Wounds. It merely adds those spells to the list of things you can.
This alters spontaneous casting.
Yes, it does not replace it. You just also can spontaneously cast these spells.
All right. I don't hate the Idealist anymore, but I really will never play it.
It's just a really happy dwarf on the cover, too.
Yeah. He's been through some things, but, he's got his mug of ale. He's got his sword by his side. Nothing's wrong with his life. Portal Seeker. Portal Seeker is an investigator archetype that feels like they were just adapting Arkham Horror into Pathfinder. I don't find it particularly great. You're mostly just finding portals to other planes, keeping them open. You really need a planar influence. Like, I feel like you specifically need to have an adventure that's mostly on the material plane, but that the material plane is getting messed with by other planes for this character to really work.
Which is a cool concept of an adventure campaign, but that would be, that's very, very specific.
Yeah, this is a very, very specific class, unfortunately.
And then what happens when the GM says, okay, I'll play that, and then nobody plays this?
It still inspired a cool idea for a campaign.
Right. Next is the Progenitor Druid archetype, this is another thing that gives up their animal.
In this case, I'm okay with it, because this is a very cool Druid archetype. This is basically a Druid of the First World, which First World is Fey. It's all nature connected, so it already lines up with the Druid archetype, but it does things that the Druid does not do, because the Druid's wilderness is material plane based. And the First World being chaotic and neutral, it gets two abilities you can choose from. You can either focus on the chaotic side, where you have the chance to cast spells without it casting, without it actually taking up a spell slot for the day, or whatever the spontaneous casters have, but also a chance for a wild magic effect, which we'll get to later. So it's like, that one is purely chaos, but I like that there is risk and reward to it. It's not purely, this is a wacky version of a caster, like a lot of wild mages are often described to be. Or the progenitor chooses nature as their primal bond, and they can surround themselves with undergrowth, which provides cover and difficult terrain for others around them. And there's no randomness to it. So you can either be the super random version of this character or this archetype. I don't know why I keep calling them characters. Or you can just be purely, you have an ability, it just works constantly in a certain way.
The other two abilities it has are infused summoning. So whenever it summons nature's ally, it automatically gains fast healing equal to the progenitor's level, but at capping at their wisdom modifier. So you're going to cap that out really fast. And the other one is face shape. Instead of wild shape, they're going to transform into different using the Fey form.
Which, like, Fey form already existed, so like a druid that turns into Fey creatures was something that we were just waiting on to happen. I like this a lot.
Yeah, and
I did not expect the nature classes to be classes that made great planar archetypes.
Yeah. I liked the I finally figured out a description for the first world that helps me understand its concept. It's like, what if it was our world, but the dire version?
Okay, I've just always seen it as it's the prototype. So it's interesting. And a lot of the things in our world, the concepts are there, but they didn't get them right. They screwed up the balance and weird things happened for no reason.
400 story tall dragons? Why? Why not? This is how you get space whales.
All right, you called out the Soul Warden. The Soul Warden archetype is one of your favorites.
This is a great character concept from beginning to end. So if you're playing a spiritualist, one of the concepts that's built into the spiritualist is that eventually, as part of your adventuring and your bond with this spirit, you're going to eventually help it move on. And then there's like all these rules for being a spiritualist that no longer has. You get to keep a lot of your abilities that you gained from it, and it's a thing. But what if that wasn't the end point of your adventuring career as a spiritualist? What if it was the beginning? It also presents that is a possibility that should a spiritualist have that happen as part of the storyline of their character, they can then transition to this archetype. But also you can just start as the concept is like during your backstory, you've helped a spirit move on, and then you found out you were good at it and you wanted to help. So this is a character on the material plane whose sole job it is, whose sole dedication is to find spirits that need to move on and helping them move it. You are the Ghost Whisperer. You get a Nosoi. Oh gosh. Okay, so you get a Nosoi familiar. It's a psychocomp. It's this little raven with a cool raven mask, and it's a scribe, and it's just a great little creature. And you use so instead of getting your spirit, you get a familiar, and then it gets the improved familiar, and it gets bigger and better. And you just get a lot of abilities that help you to help out these lost souls. You can basically absorb lost spirits that are okay with that, and then you can... Yeah, it's just great. It's just great story-wise. You're making a big trade-off with my ghost for really cool Super Raven, and just story-wise, I love every inch of it.
There is one thing that I also want to call out, and that is that at the end it says, at the GM's description, a spiritualist might help her fan to move on during play, and if the attempt is successful, she can apply this archetype retroactively, making the appropriate modifications to her class choices as if she had been a Soul Warden from first level. I have never seen that before. That is super cool. This is almost like a reverse prestige class in that it's like you are playing a certain version of a character up to a point, you graduate into another thing, and all of your past abilities change. And it's so unfortunate that this is the last hardcover because this is such a cool design space that could have influenced archetypes for years.
I am saying that through so much of this book. It's like, oh man, this is a great note to go out on rules wise. And so few of this is going to get actually used. I really hope a lot of these are very quickly adapted into second edition because... Well, some of it is. There, when we get to the feat section, there's some obvious reverse inspiration there. But man, these are so good. These need to hurry along quickly.
And finally, we've got the World Seeker, which is a wizard archetype. It didn't really do anything for me, but I also never play wizards. So, is there anything that you, as a wizard guy, liked about this archetype?
Okay, as a wizard person, there's just not a lot of good archetypes. There's like the two everybody takes, the Pact Wizard and the Exploiter Wizard are just really good archetypes. So, but also Wizard by itself is great. This one is okay. You're not going to give up a whole lot to play this, and if you're going to be doing a lot of planar adventures, this helps you automatically adapt to the planes. You're not going to get your whole party killed. It's a little bit easier to move around in the planes. So if you are going to be doing plane hopping, this has a lot of built-in really good abilities to make that possible, and to also make sure that your party members are able to hang out in the plane of fire, for instance, because otherwise you're going to have a really bad time there. But if you're not going to do any plane hopping, this doesn't help you. This is a whole class built around the concept of this book, so don't touch if not going to use. But if going to use, take this archetype.
Next up, we have the feat section. There is about 50 new feats here, and they fall into 4 categories. There's general feats, which could include some combat feats. Conduit feats, which is a new type of feat, but doesn't really do anything as a type of feat, which I find that you should minimize the number of types of feat just for clarity's sake, but it's not like anyone gets bonus conduit feats. It's not like conduit feats exclude the use of other conduit feats. It's really just these have kind of the similar framework, so they're all lumped together. Then metamagic feats, and finally style feats. Of the general feats, I didn't really find any of them that great, Perram.
There's one that's super cool. That needs to be called out. There's a feat chain for having cool tails.
I feel like these might be reprinted because I have a Tiefling Magus in Pathfinder Society, and I have a bunch of tail feats. So even if these specifically haven't been done before, something similar has. So this is Grasping Tail, then Lashing Tails, then Mischievous Tail. And actually there is a piece of art that describes one of them on page 29, which I called out to you earlier on. I said, like, oh, you know what? This one amused me. And you, what was your opinion of this piece before I called it out?
Oh man, don't make me do that in front of the live audience.
Okay, sorry. Well, I like that there is a subtle thing happening that you might not notice, and
I'll pull it up on screen. See how long it takes the audience to figure it out. Yeah. So as you can see, Valeros is doing this Valeros thing. There's a really cool tiefling lady in the picture. And what's she doing?
She's just stealing something that is not even valuable, but is so personal to Valeros.
No, that mug has stats.
Oh, it's true. All right, well, then I take that back. I thought she was just messing with this guy. Like maybe this drunken guy with a cup hanging off his belt is hitting on her, and she's like, I bet he really likes this cup.
I guess
take it. Means nothing to me.
If they're in some outer planes, maybe having a magic cup isn't all that odd, but still. Yeah. Valros's mug, when you pour ale into it, it turns into a Cure Light Wounds potion.
Really? Where's that statted out?
It was part of RPG Superstar.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Was it ever published anywhere?
I don't know if it was ever published, but you know, it was one of the top entries, and it was great. So, as long as that mug will always have stats, as far as I'm concerned.
It's got to be a limited number of times per day, right?
3.
Okay, that's what I would have guessed. So beyond that, for the general feats, you've got a lot of stuff from manipulating gravity.
Yeah.
Or using the gravity manipulation rules in a place that doesn't have weird gravity.
And to be honest, the gravity stuff is probably the most fun you're going to have with alternate planes when you do get to do your David Bowie act. I kind of hope that you can enjoy that. But again, this is a lot of these feats and a lot of these abilities that are going on require very specific planes and very specific abilities. So I often don't like to take abilities that are so situational. So even if you're going to be doing a lot of plane hopping, how often are you going to be doing a lot of plane hopping that just happens to go to a place where the gravity's different? And so having several feats based off that is odd.
Right. And it's when they're combat feats and they're situational, that's fine, because the brawler loves a good situational combat feat. And there's archetypes that mimic the brawler's ability to swap out a combat feat on the fly. But unless I'm mistaken, I don't think there's any class that just lets you swap non-combat, like just general feats, which is unfortunate, because there's a lot of feats that it's like, this would be cool in a certain situation, and it's not worth investing time for that possible eventuality. Yeah. But if you just said you could swap out all general feats, odds are you would just swap out the most popular ones anyway, and you would forget these situational ones exist. Conduit feats, Perram.
Okay, so the conduit...
Oh my goodness, conduit feats.
These are weird and cool.
So they all have the prerequisite of a certain number of ranks in knowledge planes. And apparently, if you study the planes, even a minimal amount, you can get incredible powers just out of the blue, just through hard work and study. I
mean, how much Lovecraft have you read, Ryan? Of course that's what happens when you read these weird books.
All right, that's fair. Now, I felt the balance of these was questionable.
The balance of this book is questionable.
Yeah. So it's mostly the ones that require only 3 ranks. Blazing Aura, for example, lets you shroud yourself in fire, and it only, like, a certain number of times per day, damages anyone who attacks you, only takes 3 ranks. That feels extremely low.
Yeah. One I like, though, Heaven's Light. Let you just get a little halo for 1 rank in Knowledge Planes.
Yeah, that one's useful. I doubt anyone would use that. Like, is it worth taking it to replace a torch or a 0-level spell?
Thematically,
it
it's cool.
Light? I don't know.
You can trust me.
It sounds like it might be worth it, Perram, but I'm just not thinking it is. I'm sorry. Sorry, I'm just trying to see if I called out any of these in my notes. Oh, actually, I should be going this way.
Yeah. Some other ones I really like. See, Last Rites lets you just help undead along the way faster.
Yeah, that one's cool. Death Field, deadly power of negative energy, creates a field that snuffs out. Oh, this is cool. So, Death Field just gives you a negative energy aura, but it specifically is so close to you that it's only when something like a plant wraps around you or a swarm gets you. So it's just basically a shield against swarms and the Entangle spell, which is not as situational as it may sound. Those are problems that require very specific solutions, and you might not have those solutions. You might not have area of effect spells. So having another way of getting something, and especially with no spellcasting requirement, any fighter can spend a few levels reading up on the plane of the negative energy plane and figure out a way to keep those, like, just annoying swarms that make the embarrassing stories of how your character lost, 10 points of constitution in a fight, to slugs, to dire mosquitoes. So just from experience, I can see several of my characters that would have appreciated Death Field. Healer Hands. You need 1 rank in Heal and 1 rank in Knowledge Planes. You can use the Heal skill to treat deadly wounds as a full round action. I feel like this is something that should have been in the game very early on, just to alleviate some pressure from clerics, or to give them an option to healing people other than using up their spells, which at early levels is not a great option.
Right. I mean, this is something that's existed before in the game, too. Using the skill unlock system from Unchained, you could also heal with the heal skill. And eventually...
barely counts.
And then, the skill unlock system does count, because the Unchained Rogue uses that system by default. So, considering that became Pathfinder Society legal, that is normal Pathfinder still.
All right. I'll take that. We've got the Metamagic feats. And Perram.
Oh my gosh,
the Metamagic. Are Metamagic feats just an alternate version of Words of Power?
Yes, but... Well, okay, Words of Power just there's still a lot of things you could do with Words of Power that you can't do with the meta magic feats, but it's getting close. Okay, so the meta magic feats here have some really fun ones. There's the very first one you see is fun because it's apocalyptic. Whenever it's just one level higher, but then whatever you throw down as an AoE, that whatever you destroyed is now difficult terrain. So that fireball was just so wreck that this entire dungeon room is ruined.
What about Authoritative Spell?
Oh, I love that one so much.
Do you?
Authoritative is great because it's so flexible. Okay, so straight up, you add the Authoritative Spell lets you add a rider to the spell, and that you pick a thing that you can prohibit, which includes move closer to you, move away from you, make a melee weapon attack, make a ranged weapon attack, cast an offensive spell, or cast a non-offensive spell. Whatever you do, you can, whatever you pick, anybody affected by that spell when you throw it down cannot do the thing you prohibited. And that just adds a whole lot of tactical elements to playing a spellcaster. And usually the people attracted to playing spellcasters are doing it for that tactical element. So being able to say, okay, you can't move away from the fighter, or you can't move any closer to me, or you can't no spell casting, you silly wizard, or you can't use that bow back there and that buys some time for my barbarian to make it to the back ranks. There's just so much useful there for this, and spells that just did that would be worth casting as a 3rd level spell. So you can put this on 1st level spells and make it a 3rd level spell. It's 2 slots higher, but I would love a spell that just let me do things like that in like big area effects or super targeted. I mean, the flexibility of that meta magic feat alone is just fantastic.
Isn't there a spell called Forbid Action that basically does that?
Yes, but it's not flexible. I can't make Forbid Action either area effect or array or just those 3 dudes.
So now you could slap this on Magic Missile and not have to touch the guy, not get a save.
Yeah,
you just automatically
you can just
deal a little damage, and you can do multiple targets, and all those creatures are affected by this feat, right?
Yes.
It
hits ghosts.
All right. 3rd level spell. Mm-hmm. Oh, and hits ghosts.
And hits ghosts.
Well, it is mind affecting.
Which is why I wanted to call out one that we missed. Plane Strike. Okay, so this is a high level one. But just the visual of this is cool. You have to have 10 ranks of knowledge planes in order to take this. As a move action, you can make your weapon phase out of reality, and basically it becomes a ghost touch weapon, and you just make a touch attack with it to hit. And it so basically it just turns your weapon into a ghost touch weapon whenever you want, and even specifically mentions that you can use this to attack through full cover. So somebody hiding behind a wall or a tower shield, and you can just have this option in your back pocket and just poke right through it with your big old sword.
Now this one takes 10 ranks. This is one of the more like the higher level ones.
Mm-hmm. Justin P. Slutter says that Greater Forbid Action does target multiple creatures. And yes, it does. And that's a great spell. But it still is not anywhere near as useful as absolutely no save on anything I can get a point at. It's just, yeah. Which is, again, that might be a problem with the balance. That this is making a whole spell line, obsolete.
Are you ready to move on to the style feats?
Oh, yes. Man, the style feats. Why didn't these style feats exist before this?
So, a couple of things.
Mm-hmm.
First of all, I was expecting another page of feat descriptions because there's 4 style trees.
Mm-hmm.
Archon Style, Azata Style, Demonic Style, which there's a formatting error, so it's tabbed like it's part of Azata Style, but it's clearly not. Mm-hmm. And Diabolical Style. So that's 4 feat trees, and the latest in the alphabet is still D. So I was expecting to turn the page and it would be Face Style and go through all the different outsider types.
But no,
it stops at Diabolical.
Mm-hmm.
Or Diabolic.
Mm-hmm.
Is it Diabolic or
It's
diabolical?
diabolic.
I thought it was. It is diabolic on the chart. Yeah, it's both. It's that in both places. For some reason, I thought it was diabolical. I also appreciate that by now it's just accepted that style feats do not need to be based on improved unarmed strike,
Right.
which was the major hit against them in Ultimate Combat. And slowly, as new style feats have been introduced, that element of them has been taken out. And at this point, only one of these, I believe, has improved unarmed, or none of them. Yeah, there we go. Improved unarmed strike or weapon focus for diabolic style.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I like all four of these all four of these style feat trees.
Yeah, they're great. The Archon Style was the one I wanted to call out because it basically is the ability that my playtest Paladin had. Well, actually, this is better than that ability, but I don't know what abilities my playtest Paladin might have had she leveled up a few times. But you start off with Archon Style, which is a stance you enter into where you grant an AC bonus to allies at the expense of taking an AC penalty to yourself. And the more of the feats you take down its line, that penalty starts to go away. Then you get Archon Diversion, which is you intentionally throw yourself into an attack. So you intentionally block an attack that is going to hit an ally, and then you take it instead. But then your ally
go ahead.
Sorry. And then your ally gets an attack of opportunity against the person that you blocked. And then you finally get Archon Justice, which is a fantastic name of a feat. For justice! Where you get to do the same thing, but all your allies that have reach on that opponent can then attack. And that's like as good as most really good teamwork feats without requiring the teamwork feat part of it. Only the tanky character needs to take that feat line. And I can't think of a defensive character who would not want that feat line.
Then we've got Azada Style, which leads into Azada Mischief, and Azada Sprint. Gives you a +1 dodge bonus to AC if you move more than 15 feet. And you've already got dodge and mobility as prerequisites, which means that when you're on the move, your AC is through the roof.
Right.
Azada Mischief, you can trip opponents whose attack of opportunity against you missed.
Yep.
Okay, it's situational.
Right. But you're going to be provoking them, and your AC's through the roof, so they're likely to miss.
That's, you know what? I didn't think about that. But yeah, with mobility factored in, you're running by and you're just tripping a person en passant.
Mm-hmm.
And then Azada Sprint, your base speed increases by 10 feet, and you ignore the first 10 feet of difficult terrain in a round. And as I said earlier, I like a fast melee character, and a lot of speed increases do stack. So combine this with with the Azatriel Swashbuckler archetype from earlier, and you could just be zipping around, getting a lot of attacks of opportunity, potentially tripping a lot of your opponents. It's a weird tactic, but that's both in line with the Azada Style and the Azatriel Swashbuckler archetype.
They're pointing out in chat that the Archon Style feat was in Blood of Angels, which doesn't surprise me.
Right.
I should have remembered that. But it's still a great feat line. I still like it.
Demonic Style is all about charging. So you get a +1 on attacks, +2 to damage rolls on the attack at the end of a charge. Then Demonic Momentum, gain damage bonus based on how far you charge when you bull rush. I really wish that it had been overrun as well, because I have an overrun based character, and that would have been super cool. Although, even though there's nothing restricting characters to there's nothing restricting this to evil characters, just the idea of using Demonic Style makes me go, I don't know if that character would want to base his fighting style on demons. But that's that they leave that up to how you role play, because you could be using demonic tactics against themselves, and that that's virtuous. Right. And then finally use Great Cleave at the end of a charge. Super straightforward, but it does encourage a lot of mobility, because you'll just gotta like plow into one opponent instead of standing there and just beating them up. You'll probably just want to turn around and charge the next opponent that you can, and so you'll just be like this not an offensive liner, but somebody that's, I don't know why I'm going for a football metaphor. Well, because of how the charge works. Anyway, you'll be like the guy that helps the receiver by running ahead of him, blocking everybody, like just zipping back and forth. Your only objective is to knock down as many people as possible. And then the demonic style is all about humiliating your opponent. When you humiliate a target, that provokes attacks of opportunity. You gain enhancement bonuses when you humiliate a target. And finally, you can apply Vital Strike on attacks of opportunity. So, yeah, that one's just about, I believe it even kind of implies that you're just smacking him in the face and getting a reaction from him. I think there's a lot of role-playing potential from that. And even though it's diabolic style, I think that I would have fewer good characters that object to using that kind of tactic.
All right. So moving on to
the spells.
Okay, so the spell section in here is actually not as extensive as other books. And for a plain book, you do expect to have a significant amount of spells. But the spells they have here are interesting, but they all are extremely based on the planes, okay? Which makes sense for being in the plain book. The most important spell in the whole spell list is one that will play into the planar stat blocks later, and most of the arcane spellcasters, and I think even most of the spellcasters period have this spell thanks to this book, and that is the Bestow Planar Infusion spell line. It comes in groups of 3s, and the 9-level spellcasters get it at 1st, 4th, and 7th level. And basically each plane that you could go to in this book has different magical effects that you can channel into your character. And using the Planar Infusion spell, you can pull those in. You can grant them to a target. So if it's better for you, or better for your party fighter, or better for your party ranger, whatever it applies to, you can basically give them a set of very powerful buffs by using these spells. But it depends on what plane you're visiting. So again, this is a spell line that you should only take if you're doing a lot of planar travel, though for some classes spells are like, if you're playing a wizard or a cleric, there's not a huge investment. You either go learn the spell for a trivial amount of gold, or a cleric, you just has it anytime you want it. But for spontaneous casters, only take these if you know you're going to be bouncing around the planes.
Well, you can get them as scrolls for fairly cheap.
Yeah, scrolls. 7th level scrolls aren't cheap, but yeah.
Right, but you can get, like, the level 1 version is pretty useful, and you could just get a ton of them.
Yeah. The other one is Infuse Self is a big common one, and this is a great one. Is you basically turn yourself into one of the native outsiders, which is great because that's a really easy way to not die in whatever crazy plane you just turned up in.
That one's a 3rd level spell. Oh no, it's 3rd level Magus. I guess it's kind of across the board, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a whole lot of different spells, but yeah, you need that in order to, assume you need to survive when you go to some of these planes, and that's not always easy. So there's a lot of abilities here. And then most of the other ones are fun. There's Hasten Judgment, which is super jerk move spell, which I would imagine only like really evil bad guys would use, and your players will hate you the second you pop this one out, which is quicken. Okay, and later in this book, it's going to go over how a soul travels through to the afterlife, and part of that is eventually they're going to become petitioners, and at that point all their personality and memories are usually wiped away. They just become these distant things that they can recall if they try really hard, but at that point they can't be res anymore, because that's when they become native outsiders to whatever plane they're going to. And Hasten Judgment just goes, hey, let's move that along, get this person at the front of the line now, I don't want you coming back ever. And then there's
one of my notes about the spell section is that this is kind of the kind of options I was worried the whole book would have. A lot of it is a lot more utility than super fun, I found.
And one spell that I wish didn't have one rider, because this spell could be so much fun. It already can be fun if you're playing in the Planar Adventures. It's Anywhere But Here. And it's a level 4 spell across the board for the for characters that get it, which are Magus, Psychic, Sorcerer, Wizard, Summoner, and Witch. Casting time of 1 standard action, and it's you and up to 4 willing creatures. So basically, the whole party comes along. And where do you go? Anywhere but here. The DM rolls the dice and determines what random plane anywhere but here happens to be. The requirement though is that you have to be on a plane other than your home plane to use it, which I really wish that wasn't a rider. I really wish it was just anywhere. Like you cast this spell and boom, you're somewhere. Also, you can only use this spell once a day, no matter what. Or well, you could cast it a bunch of times, but a character can only benefit from it once a day. So yeah, so you're not allowed to go anywhere but here. I meant here. I meant here.
So the reason I appreciate that rider is that this is clearly supposed to be an escape route. Mm-hmm. And you've got a spell like Expeditious Retreat, which doesn't really say you have to use it to retreat. It's just a speed bump. Mm-hmm. And it always felt like this should be a speed bump, but you then have to run away from the target of something. You have to move in a direction away from the most hostile targets. And it doesn't have it, so it's not an Expeditious Retreat. It's just Expedia. Mm-hmm. So I want something like that on an escape spell, and then you make it a lower level to make it more accessible to people, because you can't use it offensively. You can't use it. You can use it tactically, but not, broadly.
And this is a great spell to start a planar adventure on. Like, hey, I want them to have a plane, so let's get them in a situation where, hey, man, you have this spell scroll that you haven't fully identified, but you think it's a good escape spell to get you out of trouble, and then you put the players in trouble, and then pop. Oh well, guess who went to the City of Brass? And then you can start an adventure that way. But with that rider that you have to be, none of whom can be on your home planes, it means that you have to already be doing planar stuff before you start using this. So it can't be the starting point.
Yeah, all right. I like that argument, but couldn't there have just been another? Anyway, I'm rolling a D percentage to see what random plane we showed up on. 91, the material plane. Perram, I am destined to adventure on the material plane.
Random world.
True. How many worlds? There's 8
Infinite.
Worlds? 9 worlds?
No.
What's that?
Random world in the material plane. Earth is an option. Saturn is an option. I was thinking
in the solar system, but no, it's any world. Whew. I don't know how to randomize that. But I do appreciate that I landed on the material plane. I did say that I wasn't jazzed about most of the spells. There were a couple that I do want to call out. One of them was Invoke Deity. Mm-hmm. Because this is just a spell. It takes a long time to cast. It's 10 minutes per level. And you need 1,000 gold pieces of incense to use it. And a bejeweled holy system of your patron deity worth 2,500 gold pieces. But it's available to all the divine casters. And the medium, and the occultist. Okay, all the divine casters, a couple of psychic casters, and it just gives you an aspect of your deity based on its portfolio, its domains. There's some fun flexibility in there. It's a different spell based on the caster. It actually goes on.
This is the longest spell I've ever seen in Pathfinder. I'm just
it starts I've just been imagining the first row on 41. Ends on the top of 43.
How many cards am I going to have to make to fit this one on it?
Perram, I had that exact same thought.
Oh my god!
It wasn't how many cards am I going to need? It's like, oh, poor Perram. He's looking at this spell like, more? It's still going?
It's like, I was like, oh, it continues on the next page. Of course it is. It's a complicated spell. And then the next page after that, too.
How many cards will that fit on?
I don't know, man. It takes me 7 cards to put the OGL on, and this is longer.
Wow.
Oh. All right, then we get into a magic item section, but I think...
Oh, sorry, there's one more spell I want to call out.
Okay.
Songbird.
Okay.
It's a simple spell. It's low level. It's Bard 1, Cleric 1, Mesmerist 1, Paladin 1, Psychic 1, and Sorcerer Wizard 1. But what's cool, it's a swift action, and when you cast it, you then have 3 abilities that you can use based on other things you're doing in the round. So if you cast Songbird during the same round in which you attempt a perform check, Songbird acts as an accompaniment, grants a +3 bonus on the perform check. If you cast Songbird in the same round in which you activate a bardic performance, that round of bardic performance does not count against your total number of rounds of bardic performance available for the day. And if you cast in the same round in which you cast a spell with a sonic descriptor, the spell's save DC increases by 1. And there's not that many swift action spells that I can think of. There's a lot of, well, not a lot, but immediate action spells. It has its niche. You understand why you would cast it. Mm-hmm. But as a swift action spell that it's just like, oh, you're doing something? Well, while you're doing something else, this is a nice little boost. And so that was another one of those things where it's like, it took them this long to come up with this cool concept that I now want 1,000 spells written in this format. Mm-hmm. But I won't get 1,000 spells written in this format, Perram. Mm-hmm. I just won't.
Okay. I really just want to call out a couple of the magic items because we're pushing time on this and there's a lot more book. The forked rod is a really interesting thing because, okay, so to cast, you have to understand, to cast the plane shift spell, you need a tuning rod that's attuned to the plane you're wanting to go to, which is a very specific requirement. And this book will go on to why that should be even more specific and goes into a whole system, making that a part of the gameplay, which we will go into. And the forked rod is like a super tuning fork that you can put lots of destinations in. But the part that's cool is you can also just go up to an outsider and whack it, and it anchors it to that dimension. To your, like, it's not allowed to get out of here anymore until you're done with it.
Yeah, I was vaguely aware that you needed a tuning fork to cast plane shift, but now I am acutely aware of that because of this and several other options in this section. And I love the idea that you just take something it's just basically gold, a gold expenditure and a novelty item in your inventory for the most part, and it has one specific purpose. And they're like, let's give it a lot of purpose. Let's give it a lot of variety. And it makes me more excited to see plane shift get cast, which in this book, that's exactly what you want your options to do. You want to inspire in some way people to go on different plane adventures. Now, Perram, there's one thing in the magic item section I have to call out because it confused me to no end.
Okay.
The unaligned weapon special ability.
Okay.
So, I feel like I have to okay, well, it does 3 things. 1, the wielder counts as her hit dice. No, sorry, she counts her hit dice as 4 lower than her actual hit dice when someone attempts to detect alignment using, whenever someone tries to detect her alignment or similar spells or effect.
Okay.
So 1, it makes it harder to detect your alignment when you're wielding this weapon. 2, if the wielder is an outsider and is targeted by a spell or an effect with an alignment descriptor that deals additional damage to or has an additional effect on outsiders, she adds the bonus equal to the unaligned weapon's enhancement bonus on the saving throw to against that. Okay? So the second thing this weapon does is that it gives you a bonus to saving throws. Finally, the wielder takes no penalties on charisma, intelligence, or wisdom-based skill checks from a plane's mildly aligned or strongly aligned traits, regardless of her actual alignment.
Okay.
Third thing this does is that it affects your skill checks. Why is this a weapon special ability? It has nothing to do with attacking.
No idea. That's weird. That's some very useful ability stuff. But yeah, this should be armor.
It literally has 3 abilities and none of them are attacking related. But it calls out weapons, that it's for weapons multiple times, so it's not like it was accidentally placed in this section. So I read it 3 or 4 more times, and I just had to say, like, what? Like, if it at least included a line saying, like, many outsiders will arm themselves with these weapons and, like, outsider hunters will know to disarm them or something. But it's like, I don't know if it's an accident or if a combat ability was removed in editing. But as it is, it's just, what?
I don't know. This one's weird. Those are really cool abilities when you put them in context. Like, this is like, I can totally see an angel or a demon picking up one of these when they're about to go throw down on the other person's turf. Because that last rider is super important. Especially since spellcasters are the ones that are going to want this the most. And they're not exactly keen to be carting around greatswords. So, I guess you could put this on your dagger or staff.
But you have to wield it. So staff, yes. And I guess most of the time you'd have your dagger out.
Yeah. You only need the one free hand for spellcasting.
One magic item I want to call out as a good one. And actually, I want to say that the wondrous items overall are quite strong in this book.
Yeah.
The early stuff, other than the forked rod, that's the only one that I really liked in the early selection. But once we get to the wondrous items, things really pick up and things get a lot more interesting. The one that I think is really cool is the Anointed Holy System, which is both a holy system and a vial
Holy
that
symbol.
when you fill with holy water from your god's plane, does something additional. Oh, it gives you access to the variant channeling. So variant channeling is almost like an archetype for the channel class feature, and it's not something almost anybody that I know takes. I don't think I've seen anyone take it, because you have to be half as good as at your regular channeling to gain an additional thing like dealing fire damage or dealing some, some small effects that it's just not worth the amount of healing you're giving up. So having something that it's like, I am swapping out to this unpopular but potentially useful option that is in the book, has been in the game for years, but no one's using, and finding a new use for it by just kind of like sneaking it into magic item. I think that's really good design. And the idea that you're filling your holy symbol up with holy water from the plane of your god. Also, I enjoy that, the whole concept behind it.
Okay. It's a cool one. It's great and it's neat. Yeah, I like it, but I want to call out, there's one I have to call out, but since we're talking about cool ones that aren't super important, I also want to call out Briar Balm. It's this little acorn. You chuck it. It makes a 20-foot burst radius of briars that hurt anybody that tried to move it in its cover. So that's just like super useful. Also, it does the entangly stuff. It's a whole lot of bad news for anybody that just happens to get in it. So this is a fun magic item to give your players, especially since it's a one-time use item. Just giving them a few of these and then letting them use it through the campaign, it will be flavorful without it becoming something that hinders your campaign long term. And the one I need to call out specifically is because it's so important to the concept of this book is the Planar Keystone. And this is a story item. The Planar Keystone is a magic item, and I'm surprised as much as they talked about this item coming into Planar Adventures that it didn't get more of a feature treatment. But it allows you to concentrate on it for 1 minute. So this is something you can use in combat. And a group of people using it get plane shifted, 100% success rate to where they need to go, but it's a specific spot they end up with, and they take the item with them. The keystone goes with them, and it's a very specific spot. I mean, this could be like the third door on the left of a brothel in the city of I guess the city of Brass. Okay, this could be like a backwater cave at the base of the mountain of heaven, and it will always go to that same spot. It won't ever go anywhere else. And it takes the keystone with you, so people do not follow you around.
And
Important side note, it doesn't let you go back.
It doesn't? Oh, no, that's right, because you've got to...
It's one way.
It goes to the point that it's like attuned to.
Yeah.
Oh,
you try to use it again, you go right back to the place you started at.
Can you call up the art for it? It's on page 55. I just want to share it because...
Yeah.
While I was reading this, I looked at the art, and it clearly looks like a D6, and it doesn't quite look like the same symbol as on all the sides. It might be. Actually, I haven't looked at the color version in a while. I was basing this assessment on the black and white version for my printout. No, that looks like 3 different symbols. So I was expecting some random element. I thought you rolled a die and went to 1 of 6, and when that wasn't there, the item confused me, I guess, because the art set up certain expectation that it really is not the item's fault that it doesn't meet. But a little bit before that, there was the Lintel Stone that I appreciated for similar reasons. Lintel Stone is a granite brick you put over a door, and for 1 minute, that door is a plane shift door. It teleports you and anyone that goes through it to another plane, to a specific other plane. So for the same reason that you like the Planar Keystone, I like the Lintel Stone as something that makes plane shifting more accessible, makes it available to the non-casters in the party, and using a doorway as the gateway to another plane, it's just like it's an amazing visual.
Mm-hmm. The Lintel Stone goes with you too, and that one at least doesn't leave you quite as stranded as the Planar Keystone does.
But that one, people can follow you.
Yep. Because it's a whole minute that door stays active, and well, that's a lot of time for that group of orcs you ticked off to run in after you.
I also appreciate that there is a will save, because it gives the idea that someone might just want to go through that door. Like that might lead to a utility closet, and the janitor is just trying to mop something up, and he accidentally gets shifted to this other plane.
That poor fellow.
I know. You ready to move on to only chapter 2? We've been talking about this, like, these are different sections all within chapter 1. We are only on page, like, 40 or something, right? Or page 58?
54.
54 for the title card, right?
Yeah.
That's impressive, because for a rules light book, technically by page count, yes, it is rules light, but that is a dense 50 some odd pages.
Yeah. We would call this the best player's companion ever made.
Yeah, seriously. And a lot of it does have like a player's companion feel to it, but that's not a bad thing. In fact, that is quite a good thing. It does feel like 2 excellently made on theme player companions.
All right, so next book is chapter 2, Running Planar Adventures, and this is the chapter you were probably looking forward to most for this book, right?
That's right. I wanted to know, what is it about planes that appeal to people, and what advice do they have that can make me excited about running a plane, running a planar adventure.
Right.
It, starts a little dry. It just starts describing the mechanical aspects of a plane, and I cannot blame the book for that.
This is important.
And then it gets a little strange because, it's important. It's absolutely important. And it includes going over the wild magic effects, which, while I was excited about the archetype that is based on this, I was really disappointed that there's only 13 different ways wild magic manifests, and that a lot of them do not universally apply to a lot of spells. Like rolling 1 to 19, the spell rebounds on its caster with normal effects. What if I was healing myself? Like, what if I was casting a self-only spell? Like, that does nothing then. And for it to be 1 to 19, that's 20% of wild magic. It's going to turn around on me. Come on, I want 100 different things. I want it to, if I'm casting a lot of wild magic, I don't want to be able to predict what's going to happen to me.
Well, that would
I want what happens to me to actually happen to me.
Oh gosh, that'd be like a 2-page spread. But I guess that's if that's important enough, yeah, that'd be worth it. But you're right. You're about to say something, but I have a perfect segue for this, because then it takes a surprising shift in talking about the way that most characters are going to travel the planes, dying.
The River of Souls.
Yeah, because most characters that are going to travel the planes are going to do it once, and that's when they're offed. When they finally kick the bucket, they're good news. You're going to get to see some places.
Yes. All right. Everybody dies.
Hey,
so
just think.
I was a little confused that this was in this chapter.
Hey, you keep thinking that's when the campaign the campaign you're running ends. No, man, that's just when it gets started. The TPK is when you get things going.
So, while a lot of this information is valuable, it's talking about what happens when a character dies, Pharasma judging them, mentioning that Pharasma works in mysterious ways, and sometimes will just shunt you off to a plane that you do not deserve. You could be a good person sent straight to hell on a whim that no one will ever understand, and you cannot question.
And it goes through like excruciating detail of this entire process. It goes on for 6 pages on what happens when you die. And there's no more mystery to death in Pathfinder after this book.
And the reason that I'm confused, just because it presents itself not as this is the section that talks about death, this is the section that talks about the River of Souls, a location in the Great Beyond. And I know that chapter 3 is the Great Beyond, so I was expecting this to be in the in-setting, location-based things. It's kind of a mix, and that's why it does belong in this chapter, because you cannot separate how death works in Pathfinder from the location that death happens in. And it actually really doesn't geographically outline the locale, nor does it give it the same traits that it was talking about in the first part of the chapter. just kind of surprised me out of nowhere. We're talking about the River of Souls. It's a good read, though. And especially because I'm enjoying Spiral of Bones, which we're going to talk about a little later, the new Pathfinder comic that Crystal Fraser's writing. This really is like stuff that I am currently actively reading and interested in. Then we get to the role of the divine. And
well, before we move on, this is also where we're going to see our very first piece of art that's done by Kyle Hunter for this book, who is famous for done the art for the Hero deck.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh, that's cool.
So you will see artistic interpretations of every plane mentioned from this point forward. He did, like, there's like a literal, there's usually two scene views. One's like a literal, what it looks like to be on this plane, like a man on the ground view. And the other is this artistic representation of its entirety that is done by Kyle.
So next up, we have the role of the divine. And like you said in the introduction, you cannot separate the planes from the gods because the planes is where the gods are. Mm-hmm. And it goes into a lot of divine intervention. It distinguishes what the different types of deity are. So deity, demigod, quasi-deity. There's a nice line in divine intervention I appreciated. As a general rule, divine intervention should only occur once per character per campaign. That seems like a lot to me. That the god steps in and saves a character who is just otherwise in a lot of trouble.
Yeah, I guess saves the character. But when we get into the future, like the options, the divine gift that could take effect as, they give an example one for every character, and it's not always this is undoing like the typical TPK thing or shifting fate or changing the whole campaign type situation. It's that's the when it starts getting into things such as like that character can now cast Quick and Dominate person for one.
But that's two separate things. There's a chunk about divine intervention, then it talks about divine gifts. Divine intervention specifically says that it's when the GM decides to change the flow of play by introducing a god, usually to save a character. Mm-hmm. It says like to avoid a TPK if just nobody wants to roll new characters and they want to continue the campaign.
They're codifying Fiat.
What's that?
They're codifying GM Fiat.
Yeah. Faith in the divine is appreciated. It talks about just why somebody might be worshiping some of these terrible gods that seem to have no good intentions towards, mortals. Mm-hmm. Then we get into, it looks, I think it's about 6 pages, maybe even more than that. It's just kind of like expanded, but still purely stat-based look at each of the gods.
Yeah, this has their important stats that are relevant to the rule systems that they've introduced to in this book. So it's not so much just revisiting the gods. It's also, hey, we're going to talk about these aspects that we're introducing in this book, like the divine gift, for example, and this is what you need to know about the 20 most common gods that might happen in Pathfinder.
Yeah, and basically, if you are looking at playing a divine caster or just a character that is into their god, you really need to just look at this. This will give you, like, holy days. So that's a fun way of just bringing your character into the world. Their sacred animal. Their sacred colors. So if you're looking to incorporate it into the painting of your miniature. It talks about the relationships with the other gods, allies and enemies, including saying that Gorum has no allies, which I appreciated. Was it Gorum? Yeah, Gorum. Allies, none. Where they live, and the divine gift, which is the most significant new rule that's been introduced.
Right. Yeah, I mean, this isn't anywhere near as authoritative as the information in Inner Sea Gods, so you definitely want to go for that book if gods is what you're interested in, but this is a nice thing to have on hand, especially when you're dealing with their planar parts.
Yeah, and it's also, just like I really appreciated the introduction kind of summing up the planes to their most important parts. It's good to have these things just outlined, like especially allies and enemies among the gods, just a very brief, like, these are the gods they get along with, these are the gods they do not.
All right, next up is building a planar campaign.
This finally is what I wanted from this chapter.
That's what I was about to say. Oh, gosh. So it actually starts off with the question you wanted to have answer, why the planes?
And it even asks it in a way that I might. It's like, okay, You've made the choice to take your game to the plains, but your campaign's characters aren't enjoy stabbing bad guys on their home world. So why should your players risk life, limb, and the integrity of their souls to travel to plains when there are perfectly good dungeons in their own corner of the cosmic backyards?
They absolutely shouldn't. At no point in time should the players risk their life, limbs, and souls on this game.
Agreed. Player characters are the ones that this question should be asked. So it sums up as access, acquisition, confirmation, and rescue. And that is a succinct way of summarizing Planar Adventures that is different from the usual, why am I going off on an adventure? I actually think that this was really smartly written, and that is what I was hoping for. And so it's nice that I got exactly what I was hoping for. So access is that, planes are weird. You might find a whole plane that is just full of the ingredients that you need to win this cooking contest that your character is entered in. Or more likely, you gain access to the tools, lore, and resources of other planes that can either impact what you're doing on the material plane or can reverse some outside influence that somebody from the outer planes has impacted on the material plane. Acquisition kind of runs the same lines, except that you are getting a physical tool. I guess that's more the ingredient side. Access is more concepts and answers. Acquisition is the physical things you need to affect, the things you need on your adventure.
Right.
Confrontation. Something bad is happening on your plane, and you know who is causing it, and they are holed up on another plane, and you got to go smack that god in the face with your diabolic style. And finally, rescue. Something has accidentally plane shifted. Someone is on there. It says some of the most abrupt disappearances are those dealt by the donjon card found in the deck of many things.
that poor magic item.
So then presenting the planes, this is really good. It's talking about flavoring planes and specifically says it's not just another dungeon. So don't look at it as you are going here to fight these monsters in this order to get this thing. No, you are going to another world. You are the outsider now. And the rules don't apply the same way. You are flipping all over the place because the gravity's wrong. You have to just use special magic just to breathe the air. You have to consider what abilities are commonly available to local creatures and how those abilities might shape the denizens' behavior in this infernal citadel. Or, for example, in the infernal citadel. If the site is constructed from evocative materials, like if this is what everyone on that plane can do, then why would they make the doors compatible for a 6-foot-tall person? Why would it be at all like what you'd expect? One thing that often, like a pet peeve of mine for art that has characters with wings is when shirts are drawn in a way that someone with wings could never put them on. Like someone with wings should really have like a flap that goes over their torso and buttons in the front or in the back. Like that's how you would get around these giant appendages instead of putting them on like it's 2 extra sleeves. So
I have a hard time with just
if
the 2
artists
normal
were to draw
sleeves.
art, like what's that?
I said I just have a hard enough time with the 2 normal sleeves.
Don't we all, Perram? No, it's just you. I'm sorry.
No.
We all have our weaknesses. Yours is sleeves. That's not bad. It's not kryptonite. Won't kill you, I hope.
That's why t-shirts are the best.
Yeah. So like the idea of like when you're running on these planes, think like someone that is natural to those planes. How would they build their home? How would they build their cities? How would they build their entire political structure based on what we know about those creatures? Excellent advice. Gives a nice summary of how you travel to the planes, like what are the most convenient and common ways. I like desperate measures being one of them. Like if you slip inside a bag of holding.
Yeah, a bag. They putting a bag of holding inside a portable hull. The classic destroy the campaign maneuver.
And then it finishes off with something I really appreciate, which is alternate cosmology. So even though this is a book that integrates the Pathfinder campaign setting into it, it does spend a couple of pages saying like, but maybe you're not running it like the Pathfinder campaign setting or in the Pathfinder campaign setting. So here is how you would do it in a cosmology without alignment-based planes. Here's how you would do it. You would run alternate realities in parallel worlds, which honestly is the kind of thing that I think about when I'm thinking about other planes, like the kind of adventures that might interest me. That's what the category falls under. Dualistic cosmology. What was that one about? Oh, and it's a belief system without a lot of gods.
Well, it's basically what if there's two opposing deific figures.
Yes. Mm-hmm. For example, if there's heaven and hell only.
Yeah.
You know, just as an example off the top of my head.
Exactly. Could be anywhere.
Uncle Lar is in chat. Hey, Lar. This is Lar D'Souza, the artist for Looking for Group, and Least I Can Do.
Awesome. Hello.
I suspect he doesn't know what I'm talking about, but he was engaged by my passion.
Mm-hmm. All right. Yeah, that was a really good thing. This is a lot of thought exercises, and if you're going to be running Planar Adventures, you do need to put a lot of thought on what normal is in abnormal situations. And they really pitched that the plains is not just a place to go to have set pieces and really strange, exotic landscapes only filled with monsters. That's in the not a dungeon part. That it has people that live there with their own ambitions and goals. And then they will go on later to talk about that even the gods themselves can't control every aspects of their own planes, that they still have to respect free will from their inhabitants.
Now, as I was saying, this was what I was most looking forward to in this book, so I was disappointed that it is only 8 pages.
I know.
That are really about building a planar campaign.
Yeah, I agree with you here. Even though I'm usually on board with planar stuff, I wanted, because I'm on board with planar stuff, I wanted 30 pages of this type of thing. How do I run planes good?
Yeah, because the advice that's there is solid, but there is not a single section of it that I don't think could have been enhanced 3-4 times as long. Like every single bullet point could have been 2 or 3 pages. So valuable, but if this is the only reason you're buying the book, then I wouldn't recommend it. It's just not enough content there.
Right. Now comes the real reason to buy this book, is the campaign setting part. This, if you ever remember the softcover book, The Great Beyond, it talks about Pathfinder's Cosmology. It's been out of print forever. It's one of the most sought after books in the softcover line. It usually has an eBay price that is not appropriate for a book of that size. And then you have, so basically this is going on that topic again. This is talking about Galarian's cosmology or planeology. It's because it's not just the one dimension.
I accept and enjoy planeology.
Indeed. And so now it starts with presenting what's a plane stat block, which is super important because that is where it's going to tell you how the rules are different. And that's the part where you can start having fun with the planes. That's the part that the players are immediately going to notice when they don't fall anymore, or fire is actually ice cream here.
Nice. Tell me more about the fire ice cream plane.
It comes in only one flavor, but it's your favorite always.
Okay, I was worried the flavor would be fire, which was all a trick.
All right, so it starts off with the stat block for the material plane, which is a great place to go. It's called the universe. Usually planes have their statistic name and then their nickname. The material plane hosts countless mortal worlds and countless solar systems spread throughout galaxies across the universe. It's inside the inner plane. Its gravity is normal, time is normal, realm is immeasurable. It's got a lasting structure. Its essence is mixed. Its alignment is none, and it has normal magic. The core divinities is Gozra. Because, of course. Other divinities are Azarni, the Great Old Ones, Kami Lords, Kitmi'u, the Oni, the Daimo, the Rashaka Immortals, the Outer Gods, and Ysirius. Outsiders include Azamars, Kami, Ghazi, Oni, Rakashas, and Tieflings, and petitioners are prey. Petitioners prey, Oni, Daimyo, or Rasaka Immortal petitioners, or Remnant, all others. And that's the material plane. And it's a good example because it's normal down the list because it's what's used as the baseline. This is what we're used to, people. And then each of the ones we'll start going into each of the other planes. We'll start saying how they're different from normal. Also, each plane is going to have an encounter table, which is useful if you want to just get a brief idea of what kind of critters would show up here. And a quite extensive write-up. So it starts off with the major planes, which are things like the ethereal plane and the shadow plane, etc. And all the big primary planes get a 6-page spread. So a good deal of detail about this planes. They usually include at least one city in that plane, so give you an idea of what the inhabitants would look like and what kind of their communities would look like, and also several noted locations as well as the gods that are going to be in there. The first world gets a nice big feature on it, and overall it's a great read if you are interested in the campaign setting part. This is the most information we've had in one place about all the other planes. The only exceptions would be if you were interested in the 3 big evil planes. There's another book that we're not going to name that goes into a lot more detail on those specifically. But as far as the negative energy plane or the dreamscapes or the positive energy plane, this is going to have the most information. And there's some things I really want to call out here. One is the city. Let me find it here. It's got a really cool name that I don't want to get wrong. And it is the one in the Abaddon. It's called the Slave City of Awaiting Consumption, which is the safest place you can end up in Abaddon. So if you did need to go there because you need to buy something that you would buy in Abaddon, and I'm not going to approve of anything you had to go to Abaddon to get, this is where you would go and get it. And so this is where you're going to have a lot of Abaddonian tourists. This is like the shores of heaven, if you were talking about heaven. So this is basically their port of call. This is where you go, and they're going to let you leave, probably, if you come here. But its population is all... It's basically the wine rack of Abaddon. They put mortals here that they're raising them because they want to ripen their souls so that they taste real good. I mean, if you're going to be eating like a dwarf, and you vintage 1400 years ago, this is where you would store that dwarf and ripen it up. The other thing I want to talk about, it talks about the shores of heaven, and if you've run a certain society adventure, you've actually gotten to go there. And honestly, a lot of the planes locations that are mentioned here, and a lot of the opportunities to visit the planes have been in Pathfinder Society. So if you want a good some examples of the planes done, Shores of Heaven is one of the better ones of what the planes would be like. But another one I want to call out is in the Maelstrom. There is, where is it at here? It's in the later section. So it goes through the major planes first, and then it goes into some of the minor dimensions and demi-planes, which only get a single page each. Some of the best ones there are the Akashic Record, which is a library of infinite knowledge and all knowledge that most people aren't sure even is real, even people that travel the planes, because finding it is incredibly difficult, and a lot of people think it doesn't even exist. And so you can't plane shift there. You have to use very specific ways to find it that it doesn't mention. So this is like a great MacGuffin, because its existence sort of defies the concept of prophecy is dead, because you could just come here and read the future if you wanted to, or find out all mysteries if you could just look it up. But they say that and they call it the reading room. That's the other name for it. They say that one of the reasons is that finding it is because of its own mysteries, and that some people that tried to come here tried to rewrite the records here in order to change the past or the future, And it says that those poor souls often end up in their own alternate timelines that they've created. Then the other one I wanted to call out was John Delay, which is, it's in the Maelstrom. That's why I was trying to find it in the Maelstrom section. And it is one of the most organized planes of all existence, which is, why in the world is it in the Maelstrom? And it very quickly explains that. It's because this is where the Watchers, a type of outsider, a type of very powerful outsider, collect apocalypses. Basically, when a world or dimension is about to go out, they collect parts of it and bring it here and store it as a part of their little archive.
Do you want to go a little more into the Watchers now, or wait until we get to the monsters?
Let's wait until we get to the monsters. You seem to have a lot to say about them, so I was just really into this whole. Man, we've got this whole library of worlds that have just gone up in flames or whatever horrible fate they had. Also Haldane Tapestry's in here. The Dimension of Time is in here. The Herald Realm that a lot of people are familiar with from the Harrowing. A lot of fan favorites are in here.
I also think that the art really helps this section out because, most of these realms are hard to picture just because they're so otherworldly. So actually, the positive energy plane was probably the piece that stood out to me the most. Because that's usually the plane where people are like, what's wrong with the positive energy plane? You show up and it's just constant healing. But it's like, no, it is so brilliant. You are constantly blinded. And so the use of filters on that main piece, there we go, on page 118, it's just flowers, and the flowers are crystal, and the sky is light, and everything is reflecting off everything, and you can barely see details. Like, it is one of the most evocative, and also it's such a different piece. And actually, most of the art in this section is just different or awe-inspiring in different ways, including there's profile pictures of a lot of the important members of it, and just about every section you'll find at least one piece of art that it's like, ugh. But as it points out, I don't know if it's this chapter or the previous one, you are the weird one when you go to the other plane. So you, as a creature that blinks, might just gross out everyone that's native to that plane.
What are eyelids for? What? Why? Okay, so after that is the bestiary.
Yeah, we got 30 pages of monsters.
Which is more monsters than I expected.
Yeah, so it's a lot of not placeholders, but fillers. It's not filler as in it's not good content, but it's if for this plane to be structured politically or whatever in the way that we say it is, you need a couple more of these people to fill in gaps. There we go. They're gap fillers. They're not placeholders or filler.
They're important fillers.
Yes. Mm-hmm. A couple of things of note. A lot of them are high level, or high CR rather. Most of them are double digit. And a lot of them are neutral on the good to evil axis. Mm-hmm. There's only a couple of evil creatures in here. There's a few more good than that. And then predominantly we've got neutral creatures.
Mm-hmm. Well, we've got whole books full of evil outsiders. And because we have a whole books full of evil outsiders, they have made some efforts to define the good outsiders. It's those rest of the planes that don't usually get a whole lot of screen time.
So we've got the Aphorite, which is 0 HD, a new race that's what do you call them? Like the plain touch, the half outsiders. Mm-hmm. So like the Asimar and the Tieflings. In this case, they are
they're axiomites.
Yeah, they're axiomites, but the axiomites acknowledge that everyone else realizes that the axiomites are too stern, mm-hmm. and that they just they're off-putting to other people, and other people are confusing to them. So they had to mix a tiny bit of chaos into their gene pool and create this sub-race. And it's the sub-race is just can you just deal with the material plane? You seem to get these erratic, emotional people. We just want to do things in a proper, orderly fashion, and they are really messing with our vibe. So the Aphorites, I could really see a lot of fun being had there, because it's you would play them as very strict, very stern, and they would almost apologize for even the slightest bit of emotion shown, because they grow up in an environment where it's being even the least bit emotional is strange and is what makes them stand out from the dominant people in their plane. Then we've got the Bastion Archon, which is the Lantern Archon Voltron.
Yeah.
It says every now and then, like, because Lantern Archons, there's already rules that if a couple of them get together, then they can do like a gestalt effect.
Mm-hmm.
And if 9 of them get together in a very specific situation, they can form this giant multi-armed beacon-faced rock golem, or not golem, but like rock guardian, that becomes a CR20 creature and is there to just keep demons out.
There he is. He is just ready to beat some devils.
Oh, Perram, I forgot to mention, earlier you said that one of your new favorite monsters is in this book.
Indeed, I did.
I wrote it on a prediction card.
Mm-hmm.
It would be skipping ahead, but I believe it is the Sapphire Ooze.
It is the Sapphire Ooze!
Tell me about the Sapphire Ooze.
All right,
Perram.
first, you got to see it. You guys got to see it. You know how much Perram loves oozes. The Sapphire Ooze! This is Elysium's oozes. Okay, let me just read the opening. The opening paragraph is what sells this. Sapphire oozes are a form of intelligent ooze native to Elysium, steadfastly courageous and protective. Sapphire oozes are proof that even the least of Elysium's natives are heroic in their own right. In fact, they're so heroic and so not powerful that the rest of the natives of the plane are constantly on the lookout for getting them out of trouble, because they know that they're going to be just going out to the farthest reaches of their plane in order to help people in trouble.
There's also a lot of fun to this stat block. Like, Hero's Infusion is one of their abilities. 3 times per day, they can grant a +4 bonus on saving throws against fear to another creature. And at the end, it's like, this is a poison effect. So, like, just technically, if you're immune to poison, you can't get their help, but that's how they're helping you. They're just jamming you with something that puts you in a great place and makes you immune to fear, or at least resistant to it.
Oh man! And as a full round action, a Sapphire Ooze can transform into armor. You can wear this thing.
So I was a little iffy on the rules of just exactly what the armor counts as. I guess it is like if it becomes a breastplate, it has the rules for breastplate. I would have liked that rule spelt out a little more, but it's still such a cool, like, it's clearly such a cool visual that's what the art is all about. And yeah, like, I've long wanted symbiotic monsters that you can use as armor or as weapons, and this is finally the first step towards making symbiotic creatures. So it's a little late in the game, but somebody finally explored that design space.
Oh, it's such a fun critter. All right, so explain these Watchers to me and why you love them.
The Watchers. All right, so first of all, they are effectively invisible, even though they are these giant metallic bug creatures with a giant red eye. And also, did you notice that giant red eyes was a recurring theme in the Outsiders in this book?
Yeah, they love to give them giant red eyes.
So what I like about this is that they just show up when something is about to happen, and they're just waiting for the apocalypse to hit so that they can call dibs. Which is like, it's fascinating because it's almost a useless creature to the GM. Why would anyone even fight this thing? It's not there for any malicious reason other than that it really suspects that your world is almost done. But the ability Inconspicuous reminds me of the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, where if something so terrible is about to happen, your mind makes you forget it, and so you have to kind of like look and then look again to trick your mind to seeing the thing that it's blocking out. And that's basically it. Watchers are just standing there watching you, and they're completely invisible unless you happen to make a really high will save when you happen upon one. Just overall, like, I've never seen a creature that is so, like, it's just so not combat ready. Like, it's combat ready. It has a lot of abilities.
Yeah, you would not want this thing to be mad at you.
And it's gargantuan, which is terrifying, but it's lawful neutral, and it has no intent to hurt you. It just wants the remnants of your world when it's destroyed. And this is just, as a GM, you can just be like, hey, make a will save, and if somebody kills it, then you can be like, there's a watcher here. And anyone that knows what that means knows something terrible is about to happen.
Yeah, and let's not forget these are lawful neutral creatures that live in the Maelstrom.
But, you know, the lawful part of the Maelstrom.
Right. The place that shouldn't be there. All right. We could go monster by monster, but I don't want to. That would... the Leviathan of legend exists, and this is the monster you throw down when you want to destroy a planet, because it can. Also, there's a plane in its tummy.
Yeah, it's labyrinthine innards.
Mm-hmm.
Not just a plane, a maze.
Right. Well, it also goes on to like saying that there's also a plane inside the maze. So the Lavrian's Wrath, but within Zunzavel, a city of despair, the resplendent city for refugees ruled by a mysterious masked woman named Zizapal Zanzavel. It exists as a strange demiplane accessible only from the Leviathan's labyrinthine entrails, and many believe that Zizapel is a manifestation of Leviathan's remorse.
So what I like, it's CR 30, which means that you could put it up against a CR 20 group, and they will think they are invincible. They'll think, we've reached the top of the heap. We've beat Pathfinder. And then you just own them and swallow them and have 10 levels of adventures within the belly of this giant whale. And then finally you can come out and hope to take it out. And you will never kill it. You will take it out and it will go 100 years in the future into an ocean where it will rest for 100 years until its body recovers.
And that wraps up Planar Adventures.
Let's see. Does it? Yeah, all right, it does.
Yeah.
Like the archetypes, I like most of the monsters in here. I can see myself using them in some capacity. Oh, you know what? Let's just talk about the Roseling for a second. It is like a vine-bodied, rose-headed flying creature, and it's basically Shellin's thugs. And you don't really think of the art goddess as someone who has thugs, but you know what? She needs some muscle. She needs someone that'll protect her. Probably won't go after you. It's neutral good, and it's small. But, if you mess with their goddess, then they will mess with you. There's a couple more 0 HD creatures in here. No, this bestiary section surprised me because I liked it. I don't know why it surprised me. I like so much of the monsters, and the bestiaries are some of the best books that came out in the RPG line. But I had zero expectations for this section. I had low expectations for this book overall. And what I liked, I loved. I still didn't particularly... My game has not changed by having over 100 pages about the Great Beyond. That's always going to be the big thing about this book. It is heavy on content that I don't care about. Mm-hmm. But I want to make at least 3 new characters based on the planar characters. Oh, you know what? We didn't even go into it, but the Feats section opens up whole new teleporting options. Mm-hmm. So there's whole new ways to make that Nightcrawler build and a much lower level than, what did you need before? Dimensional Step, Dimensional Anchor, Dimensional something. Anyway, it expands on that idea. And the Gloom Blade would make, or the Zatariel. There's a couple of classes that could make a good Nightcrawler. There's a couple of archetypes that could just make good characters, and a lot of different ways you can go with most of them. So yeah, I may still not want to travel to the other planes, but I do like the impact the planes can have on options. I like what they can inspire for your game, and I'm not happy that this is the last book for first edition because there's still so many options. There's so many ideas that I want to come out now that I really don't think will ever be explored. At least not first party. A third party could pick up the reins, and they have all kinds of material for new directions you could take the first edition of the Pathfinder role-playing game in. Yep. So, yeah, I am glad that a book that I did not think I would like and would only pick up for historical reasons, I ended up liking a lot.
Yeah. And for me, I like the planar stuff, and I definitely wanted all that campaign information about the different planes of Galarian. I didn't expect there to be so much of it, which is good for me. And then to also have all that bonus content at the quality it was. I loved reading this book, and every single section was usually just this new surprise that had me just giggling with joy of the ideas and character concepts and adventure concepts I could now design and run, having read those. It's just great, and it's such a shame. I know we keep saying that. It's such a shame, and I only mean this for the rules portions, that a lot of design, really brilliant design work, is only going to have another year and a half to use it before the next edition comes out. Now, there's nothing stopping you from playing Pathfinder 1 from here till eternity. We will most definitely be playing Pathfinder 1 a little bit longer than most because of No Direction Adventurous. I don't imagine that will be completely wrapped up by the time PF2 launches. But if you're a Pathfinder Society player, for example, which is a humongous part of Pathfinder, when it makes that switch, there's not going to be hardly as many PF1 games out there. You're going to want to play what's new and supported, and that means these options won't be options for you.
And you know how we usually recommend people wait until an adventure path is fully published before they start playing it?
Right.
I think that might be something that happens with second edition, that the new book will be interesting. It'll have a lot of attention, but maybe wait a few more source books so that you can get a little bit more options under its belt, or wait a few more seasons of Pathfinder Society before you fully start building the new second edition characters. I'm sure second edition is going to do well when it releases. Yeah, I think even the playtest is doing well.
Yeah. I think people are going to I really think with what we're seeing from second edition, players are going to want to jump on that right away. I understand you have perfectly good logic, but gamers usually jump to the new pretty really quickly.
Fair enough. Speaking of the new pretty, do we have time to go over some of the second edition news?
We have just enough time to do second edition news. When we get
second edition news, right after this, we don't have a drop for this.
No, we do
Second
now.
edition news. Second edition news. Second edition news.
All right, since we've been gone, there's been a few preview blog posts posted up, 3 of which we want to go over today. Starting off with the Barbarian class preview. All right. So what do you think of when you think of barbarians, Ryan?
Rage.
Yes,
and
rage, which is the first thing they talk about after the intro paragraph. Rage is the barbarian's key class feature. And do you want to know what happens? Do you want to know what happens with rage?
I do, and I should point out, I haven't read the second edition blogs lately, so I don't know what happens with rage.
They don't run out of rage.
That's nice.
Yeah. And they make a good point in the article that, let's be honest, that barbarians hardly ever ran out of rounds of rage, especially when you leveled up a couple of times. But how it works is rage lasts for 3 rounds, and then you get a fatigued round. And you can't rage until that fatigued round is done. So you can't just rage all combat and then go, give me a minute, guys. You will rage for exactly 3 rounds, and then it's going to run out. But then you have to take a breather round, and then you can go right back into rage again. And it's using the Unchained version of rage, so it's giving you temporary hit points and boosts to damage and attack, so you don't have to restat up your character and have like 6 different attack stats for I'm raging and power attacking, I'm raging and not power attacking, I'm power attacking but I'm not raging yet, and I'm power attacking but I'm kind of raging, I'm fatigued. Like, most barbarian players I've seen usually have like their attack section is like longer than the rest of their character sheet. So it's nice to have just a real simple, easy to calculate math. And then so what do you think about that concept right there?
I like it. I never liked that it was ability score bonuses, because that requires math that is not in line with the barbarian. I don't want to rebuild my character. I just want to be told the simplest way to apply the bonuses that I get so that I can kill things more efficiently. And also the idea that it's like you rage for a round, you're fatigued for a round. Like that feels more like rage to me. You're not just going to be in a fit the entire time. You're just getting these bursts of adrenaline that allow you to do crazy things, and then you have to recover. It's very much like wrestling in that regard. Not that wrestling makes sense, but that is how they tell their stories.
And I find that most of the time barbarians ignore the recovery. It's just something that happens during the downtime after the fight. Now they will actually have to deal with it. All right, next up, totems. Okay, this is something from the APG, but evidently it was super popular, so they've incorporated it into the class. When you pick a barbarian, you don't just rage. You rage in service, not well in service, or inspired by a particular barbarian totem. So this is why you rage. This is how you rage. It provides you with several abilities unique to which totem you chose, but also has an anathema, which is much like the deity anathema, which is something that you should not do. And this, they mentioned that this is mostly for role-playing hooks. For instance, they say a Miri, because of the giant totem, cannot fail to accept a personal challenge of strength.
Okay,
And then
I
they
like
also,
that. And I like... So it lists a couple of examples of totems, animals, giants, dragons. So I like that it's not just animal totems, which is what I think of when someone says totem.
Yeah, and when they talk about the animal, giants, and dragon totems, those have flat out, they mentioned that those are magical. So they're not all magical, but some totems are magical and let you do magical things. Like the animal one lets you turn into an animal, like werewolf style when you rage. Yep.
All right. I'm briefly scanning here. It doesn't. I don't see anything about rage powers. So is that not a thing anymore?
That's going to be down into the barbarian feats, which have various class feats such as whirlwind strike, sudden strike, brutal critical. These are where you would, what we used to think of as rage powers would be slotted into, which makes sense because rage powers really were just analogous to talents, which were one. So it's basically what it was all the time. They also have really good fortitude saves, like the best fortitude saves. So good at fortitude saves that eventually they can never critically fail as fortitude save.
Wow.
Yep. It's the best. And that's the barbarian! I really like that it's taken a lot of the math out of the barbarian, which is great. We have a comment in chat from Bard Wannabe. I think it was Bard Wannabe. Crap. They talked a bunch. Okay. But, it's from Bard Wannabe. Well, can barbarian players count to 3? That's in question.
Aww.
Barbarians are
yes.
great. Barbarian players have been having to do the most math of anybody in Pathfinder. They're good at this. All right, and I'm going to skip this next one. No, let's do this one because let's end on a positive note. Conditions. Ooh. Okay, so Pathfinder 2nd edition conditions. So we noticed a lot of this in the things that people weren't just feared. They were feared too. They were dying 3. Dying 3 was bad because there is no dying 4. These conditions now have a number associated with them. And so they start to say what that means in Pathfinder. So that number is usually the actual statistical effect of this ability. So they talk about hampered, which is a condition you can now have in Pathfinder that just slows your movement speed. So hampered 5 takes 5 feet off your movement speed. Hampered 10 takes 10 feet off your movement speed. And then they start talking about frightened, which gives you -2 checks and saves. So frightened 2 is -2 to those checks and saves. Frightened 3 is -3, and so on. They also mentioned that frightened is a special condition that it counts down every round as you get less and less frightened, which is a elegant way of handling that effect as opposed to having shaken, startled, panicked, frightened, like all the different effects that were just more severe versions of the previous effect.
Yeah, and you just kind of had to gauge the magnitude of the word to figure out which one was worse.
Yeah, and they all had statistically different abilities, whereas now it's going to have the same statistical ability based on the number given to it. But and it goes through a lot of them. Enfeebled is now, instead of the spell just doing strength damage, it's just a penalty to strength checks. Basically, so enfeebled 5, -5 to all that stuff. And then they said they're introducing sluggish for dexterity. And here's the thing. On the surface, I like this. I like that it's sort of like combining all this stuff. But I was talking to Alex about this but since this announcement went up, and I agree with him on the fact that this might be a lot of things, keywords and special rules and conditions to track. The conditions are already one of the things that I have to reference most on my GM screen, or having the condition deck has been super helpful, so that we can, throw down cards to keep track of what all the different conditions do. And because it's unifying a lot of it in the language, so there's Frightened 2, there's Hampered 5, but that doesn't always mean the same thing, because the rules on each condition still have special rules unique to that condition. And now the severity of that condition is going to matter, because dying works a whole lot differently than fear, for example. So I worry this is an area of the rules that might be getting too complicated. And there's going to be a whole lot of keywords to keep track of now. Now, I might be wrong in that, because obviously we need to see what this is like in play. But this is like one of the areas where I already have difficulty keeping up with all the conditions. And then in 4th edition D&D, they had a lot of conditions too. And that was difficult to keep track of, because everything had a condition. Everything was throwing out condition effects. And lots of people were putting pop bottle lids all over their figures. And I was like, well, that doesn't look good, but it's at least keeping everything tracked. So that's my worry with this, but I could be wrong, and this is great. I do like that it's all unified. I just hope that this isn't so much table math that we're having to deal with during play, and I hope that I'm not going to have to basically have 2 decks of condition cards just to keep up with everything.
I mean, the condition cards made conditions manageable.
Mm-hmm.
I am surprised you're saying, like, I agree. It seems like it's simplifying it by making it a unified system, but it's multiple subsystems within a unified system. So that's like branding it as simplified and one system is misleading and will cause confusion.
Yeah,
I agree with that. But the number of keywords doesn't sound like it'll cause as much confusion as you seem to be implying. At least I don't see it does, especially when there's like an intuitive use of vocabulary.
So this is like a 1 step forward, 2 step back situation. Like, we're getting something like the unification, but then we're also going to have to keep track of a lot. Because now I don't need... Used to, all I had to care about was that thing's frightened. Now I'm going to need to know that thing's frightened 4, and then next round it'll be frightened 3, and next round it'll be frightened 2. And if there's a half a dozen critters on each side and everybody's tossing out conditions, that's going to be a very messy sheet of paper.
Yeah. All right. So I haven't read this blog post, so I will have to read it over just to see, have a little bit more of an educated opinion on it. Right. I can see what you're saying.
And next up, we have the monk. Because the monk is a fan favorite.
Is it?
I think lots of people have opinions on the monk.
Okay.
And
that's
a little
different.
And people that love monks really love monks.
Fair.
It's like one of those things. It's like, if you're a fan of monks, you are a really big fan of monks. It's I don't know how to put it. It's like if you like punk music, you don't just casually like punk music. You really like punk music.
I do like punk music.
Yes, I do love punk music too. Okay, so the monk class. This is unique. I haven't seen this from any of the other class previews, but the monk's key ability score, which is again part of the new edition of Pathfinder, is everybody's going to have a key ability score, and that's statistically important for the class because it determines the DC of their abilities, etc., etc. The monks get to choose theirs, either strength or dexterity. So if you want to be a big, strong, brawly monk, you can build that, and if you want to be an agile, backflippy monk, you can build that.
Which surprises me. Like, I feel like dexterity is so much more on point than strength in this case.
Especially if you go to like a lot of the source material, a lot of the like the pulp kung fu movies and a lot of the modern entertainment about martial arts, and especially the anime versions of these characters that are also an influence on them. You often see like there are often two archetypes of the martial artist: the dude that is just super strong, and then the ones that are super agile. So you need to be able to have your Fist of the North Star muscle brick walls, as well as your waif kung fu. There's no way on earth somebody that weighs 80 pounds can take out somebody that strong, but with enough martial arts training, they can on TV. Yeah.
Right,
so
cool.
they get untrained. They're untrained in armor, but they get unarmored as a proficiency. So they get an unarmored basic. They get expert proficiency in all their saving throws as well. So that's how they're going to handle the monk's basic armor class. They actually are skilled at not wearing armor, and they'll get AC because of that proficiency. They also get Flurry of Blows, and they've changed Flurry of Blows this time so that it's a single attack. It's a single action. They can make 2 attacks, and the second attack does take the penalty that all second attacks do in Pathfinder 2, so it's at -4 because fists are agile. But that means that you only spend 1 action to get those 2 attacks in. So you could conceivably use an action to move in, use an action to punch twice, use an action to move out, or to do anything else.
Could I get 6 attacks in a single round?
I don't know. Not addressed in the blog, but we don't know all of the abilities of the blog. I really hope so. I really hope monks can just go to town. Because by default, Flurry of Blows can only be used once per round. So you could...
Oh, okay.
You can make an attack action using Flurry of Blows to get 2 in, then strike twice more, so 4 attacks? So they already get more.
Unless there's a further restriction saying if you use Flurry of Blows, you can't do other attacks.
There doesn't seem to be any restriction mentioned here. So, yay.
This is a blog post.
Yeah. Also, they get fast speed, and it looks like it goes up by 5 feet every 3 levels. So that move in, punch twice, move out strategy starts to look a whole lot better when your base movement speed is 70. The monks, gosh.
Wow.
Yeah, they also, like, their perfect body class feature lets them basically pick one of their saving throws and just like keep making it better and better and better. And then let's see. Oh crap, there's a section here I'm missing here, but it's more than just making it better. They can become legendary in that saving throw, and all successes count as critical successes for that saving throw as an option if they keep pumping the same one.
That's cool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And of course they start talking about monk feats, so you can take monks, like monastic weapons is a first level monk feat that you can take that lets you use monk weapons as part of your and use that with any of the abilities that you would tie in with your unarmed strikes. So you can flurry with them, you can do all kinds of cool stuff with the temple sword. They mentioned the temple swords for Seon because he's often drawn with them. So yay, great stuff. Also, they still have Stunning Fist, but that's a feat you can take now, not something you get by default. And then they start talking about, yes, they still have the fighting styles, so you can enter those stances. But then they start talking about key feats. Key power is a feat you can take to start getting key abilities. And when you take your first one, you get spell points. And all key feats are just straight up listed with a spell stat block. And the one they present is Quivering Palm, which is an attack necromancy. It has somatic and verbal casting. Its duration is 1 month, and it does the Quivering Palm thing. Anytime you can, you can attack somebody, and at any time you can decide it. No, they're going to die now, and then they have to make a fort save, and they might die On the crit failure, they die, and you can do this once a day to them, so eventually they sure will. Yeah, so the presenting those as spells is interesting way to handle the key feats.
There is an element of 4E to it, and I know there was a lot of resistance to 4E because the classes were kind of presented all in a similar format, and if you like, there was a lot more similarity between classes than there are traditionally, and I agreed with that statement, but I did also argue that the 4E class like design structure could have made a cool 3.5 class. And so I was never against the idea of sometimes a fighter can feel like a wizard fighter or a wizard of fighting. I just didn't like that all fighters felt like wizards of fighting. But if there's any class that should feel like the wizard of fighting, it's the monk. So I like this, and I do like that this opens up the idea of the King Gong monk, which is just like the Street Fighter monk. You can have Scorching Ray, you can have some minor magic that really doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but this is a world with magic. This is already a world where you can kill someone a month after you hit them. So is the idea that you can generate a small fireball that crazy? No.
Yeah, and they do mention that that's an option. That is one of their further examples. They include Abundant Step, firing a cone of force with Key Blast, and then kill somebody with Quivering Palm, and then they stat out Quivering Palm. So absolutely, you can get your Hadoukens in here.
Awesome. All right. You sound happy with the monk.
I do. I like it. I enjoyed reading the monk. The only surprise was that they mentioned a lot with the fighter having a lot of combo abilities where they have openers and closers, and I kind of think that that's something that is more iconic to monks than fighters. So I hope that monks eventually also get in on that combo ability system as well, because that's totally a martial arts thing.
We have a couple of questions from chat from Nice Piano Man related to second edition, not necessarily related to the blog post we had.
Okay.
You just covered. So one of them, the novels have been dead for some time. I wonder if 2E would be a good time to relaunch.
Well, the problem with the novels, and I can't go into too much details on this, but Paizo has said that publicly that they are waiting to find the right partner for the novels. So the problem isn't that they don't want to do novels, it's that they need to find the publishing partner to do the novels, and it looks like their relationship with Tor is over. So draw from that what you can or what you will, but I don't think the edition change is going to be what makes the novels come back, though maybe the novels do come back. I really want them to come back. I know that people at Paizo really want the novels to come back. But this is a business problem, not a strategy issue.
And yeah, and I think I mentioned anyway, it was recently that one of the problems with the novels was always that they appealed to Pathfinder fans, but they didn't generate new Pathfinder fans. They didn't get people reading the novels and coming to the game,
right?
Which is the end goal of tie-in fiction.
Which is
his second question. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Which is sad because, man, I just want the novels, man. I mean, I understand that eventually the money has to work out, but there was so much good content in those novels. They were better than a lot of tie-in fiction out there, and they really showcased that Pathfinder was pulp fantasy, not traditional fantasy, not Tolkien fantasy, not even D&D fantasy. No, this is pulp fantasy. You're going to have a heist movie in hell, or actually the abyss. You're going to have a buddy cop movie, but one of the cops is a sword. You're going to have one of the best pirate stories ever. And they just, each book changed genres drastically, and they did that because the Inner Sea changes genres drastically when you just move a couple of 100 miles in a different direction. And so they took one of the things that could have been their weaknesses, the fact that their world was a kitchen sink setting, and they turned it into one of their best advantages. And it was brilliant, it was wonderful, and I loved it so much, and it's a shame that they're not coming out anymore.
Piano Man has a second question.
Okay.
Any news about pocket-sized books being released quickly with second edition?
Nothing official that I've seen. I do know that the pocket-sized books were super successful, and they love them, and that's one of the big reasons that every single hardcover for first edition is going to be getting a pocket-sized book. And they've announced that the pocket-sized books for first edition will not be go out of print until demand dies down. So as long as people are still buying them, they'll keep those in print. So that's a good thing. It's not the scorched earth that has previously happened with edition changes. And as another point, they did announce that they were going to try to get a pocket-sized book out for Starfinder quickly. The main concern they mentioned there was making sure that all the errata was going to be done for that book. And unfortunately, Starfinder needed a lot of errata with its core rulebook. So I'm hoping that means that Pathfinder playtest will also get a pocket-sized one quickly. But no official word.
I don't think the playtest is going to get one. In fact, I'm surprised.
No, the playtest isn't going to get anything.
Softcover version of the rulebook and not a pocket-sized.
Right.
But I believe the playtest stuff, it's being printed, and then everything else is going to come out as digital content. Nothing else is going to be physical other than what they took pre-orders for.
Right.
And we know nothing about the second edition release.
Right.
Other than that, a book or more will be out at Gen Con 2020.
Right. Yeah, we don't actually know anything about their business practices going forward, whether or not there's still going to be a player companion line, a campaign setting line, an adventure line, etc., etc., etc. They do seem to be operating under the assumption that the adventure path line will continue. So I expect that to at least be what we're used to, especially since they had to increase the rate Starfinder was producing that same content. I don't expect they'll slow down the Pathfinder side of that house. But as far as any other product format, release format, we've got no official news on.
So that brings us to the end of the second edition news. I think we can move the few news stories we have to some wrap-ups and shout-outs.
Okay. Yep.
All right,
let's wrap this up. And we're back.
Thank you for joining us for episode 180 of No Direction, the Pathfinder News, Reviews, and Interviews podcast. Thank you again to Paizo for providing us with the review copy of Planar Adventures, which will be out July 10th, and get recommendations from both of us.
Yeah, really great book. I'm very happy I got a copy. And?
Oh, sorry, you were stalling, so I wasn't sure if you were done.
No, I'm done. I'm sorry.
Okay. Before we go, a couple of interesting news bits and then some things we want to bring your attention to. First of all, congratulations to Paizo for Starfinder winning the Origins Fan Favorite Best Role-Playing Game Award for 2018.
Woohoo! Go Starfinder! Starfinder's awesome!
Awards, the Origin Awards have gone, the prestigiousness of the awards fluctuates, but it does still have some weight to it, and it is significant that Starfinder did beat out Pathfinder, beat out 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons, and it beat out any of the other games that are out there right now. So this is a significant award, and really congratulations are in order for the entire Starfinder team and Paizo as a whole.
That's a really great team, and you all probably know that because of the fact that we do a whole show about that every other week.
Design Finder 2018. So D20 PFSRD Publishing launched their Design Finder contest, which was in the style of RPG Superstar. They've listed the top 16. We're not going to go over them because in the past, anytime we did that, it was just terrible audio. Yep. So congratulations to the 16 finalists who are now busily working on their next item. It's not an item. All right, sorry.
They did an item to start with.
Yeah, they did wondrous items. You can go up right now. There is 16 free magic items that beat out over, I believe it was 160 entrants. Yeah, There were 160 submissions, narrowed down to the top 16. So this is the top 10%, which is a pretty cool way of, it's pretty cool that the math was easy for us. So yeah, if you are still looking for first edition content, this is brand new content from up and coming designers that have been judged by a panel of really prestigious judges. And it's run by Open Design, which is a company that has deep-rooted its roots run deep in the Pathfinder gaming community. So it is definitely something that we are going to keep an eye on, and we're hopefully going to get you updates as it unfolds. Finally, a couple of things I'd like to give shout-outs to. I mentioned it at one point. The new Pathfinder comic series that's currently published is Pathfinder Spiral of Bones. Mm-hmm. It's being written by our friend and GM Crystal Fraser, the GM on Adventurous. Mm-hmm. And it might be my favorite Pathfinder comic series to date.
Really?
And I've liked just about all of the Pathfinder comic series. I didn't care for the goblins, and I felt like Worldscape was not written for me. Mm-hmm. I did not follow what was going on in the background, and there was a lot of stuff going on in the background. But other than that, like, Crystal is so good at quips and little characterful moments, and even though the core cast has been shrinking with every new miniseries, she does a lot with the characters she has. And even though it's like a largely Valeros based story, Valeros has never been more endearing, and it's just it's fun. And I love the Pathfinder comics. And if you are looking for Pathfinder fiction, especially now that the Pathfinder Tales line is on indefinite hiatus, Pathfinder comics are definitely the way to go. I strongly recommend them, and I strongly recommend Spiral of Bones.
As I've said many times before, they have no excuse for being as good as they are. No. And Crystal does so great characters. You can hear that on Adventurous when she's just bouncing from NPC to NPC, and the whole personality and accent and everything just takes place. I am amazed at how quickly she can do that.
And Planar Adventures reminded me of Spiral of Bones often, which is what reminded me that I haven't talked about the Pathfinder comics in a while. Mm-hmm. But it is about a trial for Valeros' soul, and it is going through Valeros. The stages. Yes, Valeros, the wonderful, powerful wizard who's been alive for thousands of years. Mm-hmm. Finally, I want to bring attention to, actually, I guess it's not finally, but anyway, I want to bring attention to Lost Spheres Publishing. So this is Kristen Seward's publishing company, and he specializes in planar content for the Pathfinder role-playing game, which, if you enjoyed this episode, if you want to know more, or if you want to find more planar options, and especially if you were inspired by some of the stuff that's in Planar Adventures, but feels like it's just the first step of a massive way of supporting Planar Adventures for Pathfinder, Lost Spheres Publishing is probably the company you want to check out first. It's lostspherespublishing.com. And he's regularly putting out new content, and he's a good guy. In fact, if you've been listening to the PaizoCon coverage, he is one of the two voices that says "Sorry, Ryan" at the beginning of the show. We haven't got to that panel yet, but he was on a panel that got a little spicy, we'll say. And he and co-panelist Liz Courts were constantly apologizing to me through the recorder.
Oh.
And speaking of those recordings, if you are interested, we have been releasing them on a pretty steady basis. Perram, have you been updating the master page?
I did yesterday.
Thank you for that, because I was doing a pretty good job, but then I've got a camping trip tomorrow, and I had to prepare this episode and edit a whole bunch of content, so I haven't been active on social media or updating this page. But like I said, I've edited up until next Tuesday, and there is some really cool seminars that are coming up. So how RPGs influence World of Warcraft is one that came out today, and that one is surprisingly insightful. I didn't realize just how involved the Roll for Combat guys were with World of Warcraft and its launch. Some things that you'll want to look forward to. There's the Pathfinder playtest Q&A, but there we go. The Power of Role-Playing Games in Social, Emotional, and Academic Development. This is number 31, so I believe it's only coming out next week. But it's run by an educator, and it's attended mostly by educators, and it is a very interactive panel about a really intriguing topic, and just about using role-playing games in basically a school environment. It was not on my radar at all. I didn't even realize the seminar existed until I was listening to the recording of it, and I highly enjoyed it. And so I very much recommend that one. So keep an eye out for that one. By then, I don't know if people are going to have seminar fatigues, because we will be releasing 2 of them per day until early July.
Oh,
but don't let this one slip you by just because it doesn't have a Paizo employee on it. It's well worth the listen. Yeah.
You've been doing a great job with the editing. I'm surprised they're as well edited as they are and released as quickly as they are. if you like the seminar coverage, we will have more to talk about with seminar coverage for Gen Con later. Yeah. So, yay, seminars!
All right, so nothing to bring up about that now?
Not with certain things in development.
Oh.
Well,
Oh, yes.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
Yes.
yeah. I've got nothing to say on that subject yet.
Nobody has anything to say on anything, Perram. What are you even talking about? But Gen Con is coming up.
Yeah, Gen Con's great. Gen Con's great. We love Gen Con. And that's all I got. Oh, you know who else? No, you know who else we need to shout out to, very importantly?
Who?
Our wonderful Patreon backers, because it's only through your efforts to help us make this content that this content is possible. If you've noticed, the network has had an extreme expansion of content this last little bit, and a lot of that is due to the fact that many of you have chosen to help support us on Patreon. If you are interested in supporting this podcast and helping shows like this, our really great blogs, No Direction Beyond, No Direction Adventurous, if you're interested in helping that become a possibility and to continue, you can find a link to our Patreon on our website, nodirectionpodcast.com.
And we are a little behind on getting out preview images of the first Unconditioned